read the declaration of why and how we're authorized to have an electronic meeting. Chapter 1283 of the Virginia 2020 Acts of the Assembly addresses the ability of districts to hold electronic meetings without the need for a quorum present in a single location when a state of emergency has been declared pursuant to sections 44-146.17 of the Code of Virginia. Jerry, would you please read the motion?
I move that the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District Board of Directors has determined that the nature of the declared COVID virus emergency makes it impractical or unsafe for us to assemble in a single location for the purpose of transacting business statutorily required or necessary for us to continue operations and discharge our lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. I think we can just do that by voice.
Aye.
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 Motion
We can go
carried.
right around the pictures for all of these.
Pardon me, Chris?
We could go right around the screen as we answer.
Right. Yeah. So we're in business. Let me just say that, first of all, this is an open meeting. There's no reason to have a closed meeting today. We will be discussing some personnel things we need to discuss, but not about individual personnel actions. It's going to be a very full meeting. I hope you've all had a chance to at least look at some of the things Laura sent out, which were quite good. She wants to spend quite a bit of time today on strategic planning, and I think she would like to spend about half of our time on that. We did have a PowerPoint on that, and we'll probably all, at least I'll have to turn off my video when we're trying to watch the PowerPoint. But we've got some personnel policies to review. We've got a benefit policy that really we need to take a serious look at today, and I hope we will adopt her recommendations. And then a governance committee process and outline, which she'll discuss. So I'll turn the rest of the discussion on personnel and the other things probably over to Laura to lead the discussion.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you all very much. I really appreciate that we're making a little bit of extra time for today, because we do have a number of things that we've been talking about for the last couple of months, and bringing those forward today and setting some framework and really a process for moving forward, both on the personnel policies and doing a full comprehensive review of our personnel policies and doing it in a very systematic way. And I want to thank Jerry for all of the work that he's done already and really helping to get to this point. As it relates to personnel, as John was mentioning, there is the benefits policy, one that we currently have on the books that we really need to take a good hard look at and decide, one, do we want to continue it, or do we want to kind of follow the recommendation that I have with removing it and then adding a little bit more of a broader policy with the commitment that we have regarding offering a competitive benefits package. Also, we'll do the governance committee. This is another thing that we have been talking about. And my hope for today is once we have a chance to review the framework that has been established for those two different kind of ad hoc committees, that next week when we have our board meeting, that would be the time to really formally establish them. But I wanted to give us some time to look at them and get your input and your feedback on the process that we've just sort of outlined. It's a draft process. And certainly there are some things that may be more specific that you would like to see in there as well. And then, as John was mentioning, we're going to jump right into the strategic planning process. And Jerry and I met a couple of weeks ago to take a look at that. And my hope with that process today is give you an overview of what the schedule is, tell you a little bit about what we've done up to this point, and then really jump into starting to work on the SWOT analysis. And we'll work together. I'm going to bring up my screen and we're going to work together to kind of fill in some of those blanks. And then you're going to have the opportunity to send this out to you, and then you can continue to work on it until we have our next opportunity to gather. So,
Laura, can I make a comment there?
Sure.
I know you've talked with Jerry, and I really appreciate the fact that you've asked Monica if she would be the board coordinator for that activity on the personnel policies, and I really appreciate that, and thank you, Monica. Same way with governance. I think you've already contacted Diane, and she has agreed maybe to lead that one. Is that correct?
That's correct. So why don't I open these up and we can take a look at them together, and
Right.
then I can answer any questions that you all might have. So I am going to share my screen here. so that you can, that would be this one, share. And let me zoom in a little bit. I've realized that sometimes it's a little difficult to see from my screen. So hopefully you all can see this. So this really just kind of reaffirms what we have been talking about for quite some time. This has actually been a large goal for me for quite some time, to really go through our personnel policies and really document our current policies that have really been tacit in nature, and clarify roles and responsibilities. And this really stems from a lot of the conversations that we've had over the last 8 months, really, and before then as well. So our goals are to really restructure and to really beef up our personnel policy section of our policy document. We're going to clarify the roles and responsibilities and clearly define what those are between the executive director and the board of directors, and review and update our existing personnel policies, as well as develop new policies where there may be some gaps. We will be organizing, this is a lot of the work that I'll be doing, but organizing a lot of the materials that we have on our shares drive, so that they're accessible as well. And then as a board, I think there needs to be establishing a regular routine for the review of our personnel policies by our executive operations committee, at least on an annual basis, but perhaps even on a semi-annual basis. So as John was referencing, Jerry did a lot of the legwork, and during our conversation, he was kind of like, all right, Laura, you've got it from here. And it suggested perhaps, engaging an additional board member, and Monica has agreed to step in and provide support and being the part of the review team for this. And there may be other associate directors or other board members who would be interested in participating. And this may be what I like to call kind of an accordion type of process, where if we have our review team, there may be a need for bringing in others at different times. And then, we kind of go back and forth a bit. We have Terry Higgins, who is a human resource specialist down in Henricopolis near Richmond. She knows districts really, really well and helped to develop the personnel manual that was distributed by the Virginia Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts. I reach out to her from time to time, and I think that she could be a great resource for us as necessary, with kind of working through perhaps untangling some issues that we might have.
Laura, who's she with again?
She's with Henricopolis. She's down in the Hanover County, down near Richmond, but she's also associated with Henricopolis Soil and Water.
Good. Thank you.
So she has come to a number of director trainings and things like that, and has really provided a lot of great input for districts.
I'm glad.
Laura, I believe she's a private consultant. I don't think she's an associate or a director, but she works with the state association on a regular basis.
She does. But she is an associate director with actually, I think, at least 2 districts. But she has been fantastic, and she's certainly been helpful in the past with me.
Would we have to pay her? Is that a contract that we'd have to?
I will have to ask her. She has volunteered services in the past, and I think we would need to be really deliberate about what we would be asking her to do. Certainly, I think in that volunteer role, it may be, just doing a quick review of some of these different policies, maybe once a month, and then providing us with some feedback as we're working through drafts. But I can certainly reach out to her and find out that information.
Thank you.
The timeline, all of these activities that we're going to be talking about today are going to be taking place this spring. And I know you're probably feeling like, oh, this is a whole lot to do this spring. And you're right, it is. And I think by being able to sort of set up a schedule and set some meeting dates, that's going to help keep things on track, or at least be able to do check-ins on a regular basis to see whether or not we need to make any modifications to the schedule. But my hope is that we can move a lot of these processes forward so that by the end of June, by our June board meeting, that will not be the first time you're going to be seeing these, but it will be the opportunity to approve them and then perhaps begin implementation in July. If we need to bump that back into FY22, we can certainly talk about that, but we will be able to have much more of a heads up, and it won't be a surprise if we need to do that. For this process, the personnel policies certainly are very important, and they're comprehensive and long, and they're quite robust. So Monica and I have talked about meeting every 2 weeks beginning on February 4th. So really kicking this off very, very soon, and just beginning to get into the rhythm of things. You're going to note here that we're going to basically our monthly executive operations committee meetings are going to be check-in points where we can report back and provide updates. We can give draft, policies for review by the executive operations committee, and we can kind of again continue to keep track of things. John noticed this when I had shared this initially, that we're not going to be holding any meetings for this committee in April. And the reason for that is because April is a very, very busy month for us just generally at the district. And I would hate to overcommit and burn out during that month, which is already very, very intense. So it's going to be kind of a pause period, perhaps even a little bit of a catch-up period of time for this committee as well as for some of the other committees as well. But you'll see these are the various elements that will be reviewing as part of the personnel policies. And again, piggybacking on those executive operations committee meetings as check-in points and opportunities for review, and then ultimately work toward approval on June 22nd.
Laura?
Yes.
Two comments. First, I'm very pleased to see that you have several opportunities for the executive committee to review what you're going and hear your thoughts, yours and Monica's deliberations on this. Thank you very much. The other is I'm looking at the individual topics you're going to take up each meeting. Are there any of the elements of personnel policy that I discovered in reviewing all of our background documents that are not on this list? Like dress code. I know dress code doesn't need to be on here, but you've gone through that list and you decided which things need to be addressed.
Yes, I do think that there are some items that are on that list that are not incorporated. Dress code is one of those examples, but these are the key pieces to our personnel policy that we currently need to really wrap our arms around. So this is what I would suggest for this first go. I think, again, we need to come back to the personnel policy and continue to add. But I think these are the key items that we really need to focus on for this 6 months period of time.
Okay. I would ask you to at this point, next week or so, not tomorrow or today, tell us which ones are on that list that come out of our source documents that we're not going to address on this first round. I'm all for saving the lower priority things for later. But I'd like to know where we're bypassing. What you're making a recommendation here that we're bypassing some things, and I'd like to know what they are. That's all.
Gotcha.
Thanks. The other thing is, before we leave the personnel policy, I noticed in your table in the back, very, very detailed and very informative, but I noticed that the only links that you provided to any of the source documents, and there were several that I identified, the only ones you added links for are the Fairfax County procedures.
That's right. It was just, those are just, your source document is an important piece, and that's going to be a big part of our first meeting. And I apologize, my screen is over here, but my camera is over here. So your picture is over here on this side. But Jerry, the document that you pulled together is not forgotten, and it's very, very important and useful. So even though we just have the county links in here, it doesn't mean that we're only going to be modifying county information. There's some great references and resources that you've provided information for. So I just want to reaffirm that you know, it's comprehensive. It's not just trying to modify county policies to fit ours.
Thank you.
Laura, I had a couple thoughts. One, I was a little surprised to get some of the updates yesterday. I had thought that some time ago, John and myself had expressed an interest in being leads in personnel committee. And I had done some work looking at the director guidance manual and separate some of the personnel issues out. And then Jerry obviously did his 100 or 50 some pages document of work, which I haven't seen any response to, which is very difficult because how do you do that meeting FOIA guidance to create a document with a team and not spread it around? The biggest thing that I see, and I've struggled with, is the first thing under February 4th is authority. And you just mentioned a bunch of county issues, but we're also a state board. And I'd be really interested, before we even go into a lot of this, is to try and set up a meeting with maybe Debbie Cross, who gave us that long bit of director guidance that included a significant amount of personnel. And if this Terry Higgins is available, depending on the financial part, to have a joint meeting to just look at what does the rest of Virginia do and where are our authorities? Are we a county? Are we a DCR agency? Are we a hybrid private industry or agency? How do we fit in? And I'd much rather see some guidance from our the people that are over us in how to develop a scope rather than do things and go along and then find out that we missed a few things. And we've got a whole big 3-inch binder of director responsibilities, and it applies to the second update that you provided too, and the personnel ones that I think there's a lot of stuff in there that we need to follow.
So
Let me make a comment on that, Laura. Comment on that. We are independent jurisdictions of state government, so our authorities are pretty clear for most of us that have been around for a while. And yes, I don't have any problems at all with going back and discovering and discussing some of those authorities. That's probably a good thing to do to get us started.
And just to note, I mean, I do recall Debbie did give a thorough explanation of how every individual soil and water conservation district has a unique way to apply their authority and scope. And she made that distinctly clear multiple times. I think I hear your point in maybe wanting to revisit that, but I think for the purposes of efficiency and efficacy and a timeline, we can speak to all of the information that we're gathering when we're reviewing this and provide how, that's part of the February 23rd, right? To be able to kind of communicate that scope and that review of getting to these stages. And in the interim, I'm not sure what purpose to hear her reiterate that each soil and water is unique.
Well, and we have the flexibility to do our unique thing as well. I mean, that's what I think is what you're also expressing, is that just let's move forward instead of, kind of gather up our information and make our policies.
Exactly. Thank you.
Jerry has done a significant amount of work on that. I'd like to see Jerry continue to be involved in it, and I'd be willing to work on it too, but I understand it's hard to create by committee.
Chris,
I definitely appreciate Jerry's what he's provided, and I am thoroughly reviewing it and intend very much to ensure that all the work he's put into that is definitely reviewed. Absolutely.
I appreciate that, Monica. And Chris, I would note that if there's only 2 directors there, it does not require a 4-year notified meeting.
Right.
You and Monica and Laura and any of the other staff that, including Debbie Cross and Terry Higgins, that were there, don't count toward the 4-year requirement that the meeting be 3 or more
Well, I just want to make clear, I mean, if this is a committee meeting, we do want to make sure, I need to clarify that, Jerry. But if it is a committee meeting, I think we do need to follow FOIA guidance. And for open meeting requirements, which would just be advertising. So if we have the schedule all figured out, that's really the point of it. But there would be, it would be an open meeting essentially with being recorded.
Fine, you're the FOIA officer.
But this doesn't preclude any of our board members who would like to take part in one of those meetings from doing so, does it?
If they are there, then more than 2 members would be a meeting, and we'd have to advertise it as well. So.
It's advertised anyway.
No,
We would be at, John, you're right. I would invite, Monica is the chair, but I would certainly, if it is, we're going to follow open meeting laws, and, if there is a need, or if there is an interest.
The February 4th meeting is not a FOIA meeting if it just has 2 or fewer directors attending. The executive operations committee, yes, that's advertised, and that's what I was saying. I'm glad to have those opportunities for the whole board to hear what the people working on the language have to say. But if you or Chris wanted to attend these working meetings, I don't think, Laura, that triggers FOIA.
Okay.
Don't we advertise all committee meetings, Laura?
I do.
Are these committees? Are we setting up committees? We were just saying there's a review team. The name is a review team. We're not formally designating a committee. Somebody's doing the deliberations and discussions leading up to presenting something to the board. That's not it.
And that's a committee meeting.
That might be a good question, Jerry, because I'm thinking that if we do decide we're going to establish this personnel review committee, we'll actually vote on that at the board next Tuesday.
That's one of the things to be discussed.
How do the rest of you feel?
Well, John, you and I a long time ago kind of started the draft of a personnel committee, and then COVID didn't help us out any, and other things got in the way. And Jerry's done a lot of work. I don't know how a committee just got established.
Jerry's work isn't going to be lost.
Yeah.
No, that's not the point. The point is the work, going through the sources and coming up with proposals to take to the full executive operations committee. That work doesn't have to be done in public.
No.
As long as no more than 2 board members are attending. The way I read FOIA, and I've been through it trying to find out what it really means many times. The training only covers a part of it. So no, I think Monica and Log can get together and talk about these things and work through them to have something to present to an open meeting of the board. And if you or Chris or Adria or somebody else were there helping, I don't think that triggers, as long as 2 of them.
As long as there's not 3.
Right.
Well,
That's
if it's
correct.
advertised, then it can be 3.
Correct. I'm just trying to save Laura some trouble. I mean,
Yeah, and I think
every one of these meetings and take as much time as the meetings.
I agree. And I do think that we have to, I think, sometimes it's good, like, I don't even know how to say that. Jerry's done an exceptional job in putting this document together that we can utilize to kind of move forward. And then I think it does add a layer of, if it is an open meeting, I'm concerned about the conversations per se. I just feel like for efficiency purposes, it's easier if it's not open to the public in this process. It's kind of like, it's the process portion. It's making the sausage, right? And then it's creating that space to have the open conversation about what we present. And that makes sense.
Without have to be really cautious about stuff that, whether offhand or not, that
Exactly, Jerry.
maybe didn't want to be recorded.
Yeah.
They're working sessions. It's not. I don't see it as
Yes,
committees
exactly.
in terms of
That's a good way to describe it, I think. Laura, is that?
I'm all for as much director participation in this whole process from beginning to end, starting with the review of the material already done, selecting what ought to be in our draft version as possible. But I don't want the requirements for open meeting notification, whatnot, to get in the way of doing some productive work. So, Laura, if you want to advertise them and make it open, that's up to you.
I think we just need to be conscientious of how the perception of how it could be perceived, and so let me go back and dig in a little bit on the FOIA and just understand if it's if it's a party of two, does that constitute a committee, or could it be perceived as a committee, and would we want to just advertise, which advertising includes posting just here and sending it out via email, just a notification.
If it's not much work, then it's a moot point, I guess.
It's really not much work.
Laura, it sounds to me as if there's some consensus for hoping that some of these meetings can just be working meetings and not open to the public.
Yeah, as long as no more than two directors.
Yeah.
For any purpose, you get
That's
more than two directors, and it's a meeting.
yeah. I think we all understand that, but is this something that we'll need to ratify at the board meeting?
I think at our executive committee meetings, we've got Laura's inserted 3 meetings here
Yes.
for her and Monica and whoever else attends to say, here's what's going on. What do you think?
No, I'm just talking not about that, Jerry. I'm just talking about ratifying the process in this group.
Yeah, if you don't mind
The board
me
has
speaking,
approved of it.
if you don't mind me speaking up here, John, I think yes. Essentially, what you would be doing is making, there would be a motion next Tuesday, identifying Monica as taking the lead on the personnel policy review process.
Fine.
And then that would just essentially, and then you can go into a little bit more detail, just as we've sort of talked about with the anticipated completion date of June 22nd, with updates being regularly provided monthly at Executive Operations Committee meetings, and can write that down and get that to you.
And I think for today's discussion, we need to do that for many of these things we're going to discuss next Tuesday.
Fine. Let the public know that we're doing it.
Yes.
We're working on these things, sure. And have a motion saying we're going to be dealing with this, and whatever in Laura's memos here that we need to make a point of recording, then that's fine.
Laura, any other discussion on the personnel policies, or anybody have any other comments on it?
No, I think
don't.
Laura's put together a nice outline here.
Where do you want to go next, Laura? Do you want to go to the benefits?
Yes, let me capture this note real quick here. And I put myself on mute so you don't hear me tippy-tapping the whole time. All right. Okay.
I would ratify Chris's suggestion that at some point, it might not be, the 4th of February, but early on in the process, talk to people who have seen other districts do this and hopefully know better what the bounds are, the meets and bounds. Talk about this question and this has to do both with the personnel policy, thing about the authority and scope, and the governance committee thing, which is new to me. I hadn't seen this before. It's a good initiative, but I think that getting the Virginia Association, Debbie Cross, the people in DCR that are part of our governance to come and address these things is worthwhile. We are, as far as I can tell, correct me if you know better, fairly unique in the amount of duties that we have delegated, both informally and formally, to our executive directors, both to Diane and to Laura. And so it may be that we can get some perspective from people who've seen what happened across the streets. not to normalize us be like everybody else, not the point. But to
Jerry, we're not that unique. There's many districts in the Commonwealth of Virginia that do it the same way we do.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
See, that shows how much I know. It'd be nice to,
But not all do.
well, no, I'm sure some districts don't have much more than 1 or 2 employees. Why would they need an executive director? I'd like to hear in terms of what the limits are. And I think the limits are not only by the law spells out the responsibilities of boards. It also says the boards can delegate all of these responsibilities the way they decide. So we have a lot of power here. But what is acceptable practice, I guess, is what I'd like to hear their perspective on. And maybe that's not at one of the working meetings. Maybe that's at an executive committee.
Jerry, that's probably a good discussion to have. However, in the end, many of those decisions are up to us as independent jurisdictions of state government.
Oh, no, your point is well taken. You're absolutely right. And I think that the state law is pretty declarative when it talks about delegation of authorities. That we can delegate any of these things. I just think that in terms of good practice and potential liabilities, that they be explicitly delegated, not just tacitly.
And things that we as a board have decided we want to be what rules us.
Yeah. And we're the final say so. I don't see anything in the law that says that anybody gets to second guess us. Right? And it's kind of where I want to hear Debbie Cross talk, because I can't tell from all the formative language that I've been through in the last couple of months that DCR has any legally defensible say-so over our operations.
I think
passed to us, but I'd like to hear what she had to say about her responsibilities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, that's a good discussion. By the way, DCR is not over us. They are the state agency that provides support to us.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to say too. Like when she did the presentation, it's not that she leans into providing the oversight of how the organization runs. It's more, she's just there to share, experiences in how people function and to kind of the main guidelines, but it's more of a supportive versus an influential role in how she was presenting the information.
And here in Northern Virginia, I think we all know this. I know you all do. We're not subordinate to the Board of Supervisors.
No.
But we certainly know how important they are to us, and we work very hard at maintaining good relationships.
Sure.
We know by every bit of their budget dollars how important we are and they are. Right? Because we wouldn't be able to survive just on what DCR provides.
No district can, any place in the country.
No. So, I mean, you have to kind of, just like extension, there's a lot of things that the county provides that the state would not be able to provide, like, office space and other things that just aren't available everywhere. So.
And I just want to make a point in saying that, there's a lot of the things that Debbie's presented in her orientations that relate back to some good practices, good common practices and things like that. Personnel committee, it's not a bad idea. We have set up our executive operations committee to sort of serve in that same role, but it's slightly differently applied across many districts. And I've reached out to some of my counterparts in terms of how they engage their personnel committee in some of these decision-making processes and what authorities are given to the district managers or executive directors as well. But I think what's also really interesting is DCR is also providing us with that liability insurance. And I think in order to protect that, there are certain things that we do have to do. And many of them are part of our grant deliverable requirements. And so there's some of those kinds of things that we just have to kind of take into consideration. But this idea of what is absolute, right? And I think that's what I'm really hearing. What is absolute? I think those of us who have been working in the district feel comfortable with that, and in terms of understanding those and what it is that we need to do. The application of how we get there is a little different among the various districts. And so I agree. I think it's a good practice. I'm opening this up to also say I am open to new ideas. If we want to do things differently, if we want to have a representative from a personnel committee sit on an interview panel, or we run the final interview through a personnel committee, or there's a whole wide variety of different ways of kind of slicing the apple. I'm open to that idea. What I'm really hoping for is that when we develop policies that we can all get behind and feel confident with, and that can be applied in a way that feels fair to all of you, but also to the executive director, and you know, again, respects those, you know, defines those boundaries and respects them well into the future. So I think, again, this is going to be a very, very good process, and it's going to be a lot of work, but, you know, I think it's really, really important.
Laura, another question. Since we're a one county 5-member board, we don't really, at this point, I don't think, have a personnel committee, do we? We have our executive committee that plays a lot of roles.
Yeah, and that personnel is one of them.
And personnel is one.
Yeah.
Do any of you feel a need to actually say that they also act as the personnel committee? Do we need
you know, I would like to take the time to just review all the information, and then as we move forward, present it so it's fairly and comprehensively presented from perspectives, and then can have a discussion. I mean, if I say something off the top of my head, I think because we're so small, too many committees and too many meetings becomes more of a headache than is necessarily sustainable in a small space. But one has to weigh all of that. And I think that process is what we hope to do in the next couple months.
Understand that, Monica. I was just thinking that maybe someplace we need to say the board plays these roles.
Exactly. Yes, John, absolutely. I 100% agree.
I think we're going to.
I have one other comment that I think is extremely important, particularly in relationship to recent history. Diane and Laura have been extremely good, competent executive directors. I think when we write policies, we have to look at the possibility in the future that our written guidance has the possibility that the future executive director may not be as good, may not be as competent, and may have other means of things they were trying to be done. It's easy to give away responsibilities by saying, yeah, Laura, that's great. And that's all it takes. It's very hard to claw back responsibilities that are in a document that is already approved. As we've seen, democracy is fragile. And there's all kinds of things that are not written in the Constitution that were considered the norms that were broken. And now people have to go back and say, how do we codify some of this stuff? And I think it's easier to write a more restrictive policy and give up responsibilities than it is to get them back when something goes wrong.
I would also remind everyone that Laura does have, or the executive director, I should say, does have a process in which their performance is reviewed by the board. And so I think you know, while I hear what you're saying, I'm concerned about restrictions, because to me, if someone's incompetent, it's not about having the board take on those roles. It's then about letting go of someone who can't handle the job, because that's actually the more adequate way to go. You don't want to have a board take on the role of an executive director if the executive director isn't performing. You let the executive director go. So we have to be very careful on putting in responsibilities and making sure that they're, again, to John's point, developed and created in a way that respects all the roles and an understanding of those expectations.
Some of the stuff that Laura just said about open to other things, like I'm mostly interested in the strategy going into hiring and the protection of our liability issues if we go to fire somebody. And I think those are board responsibilities that we can't give up. And go ahead, Laura.
I'm sorry, Chris. I thought you might have finished. But if you have, please continue.
You know, I don't want to get too repetitive in a lot of this thing, but I think you'll find that if I go through these responsibilities of what I think we should do, there aren't many. There's so many things that I have no interest in doing that Laura does very well.
Well, I think that's what our group can talk about.
Chris, I think you make some really important points, and I'm on. There's some of those things that absolutely I would want to reinforce, that these policies would not necessarily be written just for me, but they would be written for the agency, for the organization, for the district. And I think you know, making sure that it's in a way kind of codifying some informalities that we've had, and it hasn't been necessarily wrong, but it really, I think, is going to clarify some of these roles and responsibilities and reinforce the importance of board authorities. And that's really, really important. So I hear what you're saying, and I will definitely keep that lens on, as well as like, oh no, this is just what Laura would do. But that may not necessarily be, you know, the right thing for the district. And that's where, again, Monica can help with her eye when we're bringing in Terry or, you know, another human resources representative, if that's what we need to do, that they can help to take a peek at that. And then, of course, you all are going to have the opportunity to look at these. It is really important that you all feel comfortable if we need to make modifications and changes. Areas where you don't feel it's strong enough, I'm looking forward to hearing that.
Yeah, and it doesn't preclude anyone from doing their own kind of, just as Jerry did for that 55-page document, Jerry. Thank God I waited to do that at work, because I did not.
Was it only 55 pages?
Yes, it might have been. I was ready to print it at home, and then I was like, oh no, that's not happening. I'll take that into the office. But I do think, though, you know, I started before the holidays really looking at a whole bunch of best board practices. And I think that for anyone who's interested, there's really a wealth of information out there. And it just helps kind of looking at how everyone functions and the opportunities, and really kind of thinking about that in broader terms. It's a good thing to do. And certainly that way, coming into that meeting on the 23rd, when we're all doing it together, you know, it's having that broader appreciation and understanding of board practices is a good thing.
Monica, if you have some sources that talk about it in general, or for soil and water conservation districts in particular, that talk about you know, board responsibilities, share it.
Yeah, I can. You know, I've been doing more general and kind of going. So it's you can get lost in some of these chat rooms. So I went on like Blue Avocado, and then there's another one that I'm forgetting the name of right now. And they have a lot of Q&A sites. And so you have this wealth of information from small boards to large boards, and, you know, questions about practices. And so you can kind of start digging and then just meandering in through, like, it's like some kind of a wormhole that you'll fall into, because there's millions of questions and answers. And it's just an interesting way to gain insight. And I tried to kind of, it wasn't all soil and water. I did try to connect into the smaller organizations and the smaller foundations, because
so there aren't one or two sources that talk about the scope and operations of boards of our counterpart.
For soil and water specific, no, they're more broad. And but you can kind of target into small organizations. So you can kind of, so that is more representative of this, right?
I think it's really interesting, and this kind of is a great segue into the governance committee side, because I think this is a big component of what we have talked about, and we've used the reference of the Dakota County Soil and Water Conservation District's board operating procedures as kind of our reference. But there is a wide variety of different training opportunities and things like that are really geared to nonprofits. There's very little, and I've actually, John, you know, I think this might be a good suggestion for NACD. There's few resources like that on how to run a board of our type, and the kind of, you know, unique aspects of a political subdivision versus a nonprofit board that come into play. There's still the same structure of things, but the components of them are just a little bit different. The details are a little bit different. But Blue Avocado is a great resource as well. But before we jump into the governance side, is there anything else, anything else that you would like to bring to my attention regarding the personnel policies? It sounds like what we were suggesting is at Tuesday's board meeting, there would be Monica would be appointed to lead the personnel policy review process, and that updates will be provided monthly to the Executive Operations Committee for review, with a completion date of June 22nd for board approval. It would be completed before the board meeting, wouldn't be completed that morning.
Yeah, I think we might not want to lock ourselves into that, because you never know, another COVID comes up or COVID gets worse. But I guess just saying that's our plan doesn't lock us in.
That's our target.
Right. Okay. Governance?
All right. Before we jump into the governance committee, let me share my screen again here. We're going to talk about the existing health benefits policy and a proposed.
Very interesting one, Laura, that I didn't even know about, and I don't think you did either till recently.
Yes, this one kind of slips through the cracks, if you will. Did all of you have a chance to review this memo?
Yes, I did.
Okay. I just wanted to know how much of the background information you would like for me to go through. But essentially, back in 1995, there was a policy that was established to really provide compensation to employees who chose to waive participation in the district's health insurance program. And my recommendation is that well, let me back up for a second. The policy has been defunct really since the early 2000s. And talking with my predecessor, it was noted that it was put in place, I think, with really good intentions, but the implementation of it really posed challenging. And it really went defunct back in the early 2000s, but it stayed on the books. So as you noted, or may have seen in the memo, it is very generous. It would essentially equate to about $7,000 a year per employee, and that it would be treated similarly to a bonus. So all of the taxes and everything would be accounted for. We do participate, as you all know, in the Fairfax County healthcare program and health insurance program, and the county does not offer this option to their employees. So it is really important that we decide what we are going to be doing with this. And I think we need to take some immediate action on it, one way or another. It is my recommendation that since it really has been defunct, I am an example of an employee who has waived healthcare coverage. So I could have been collecting this fee for the last 8 years, but I've not. But you know, it is something that, again, I would suggest we don't retroactively go back and pay me the $56,000 or so associated with it. It's okay. But we have already a very good healthcare program and a great relationship with Fairfax County's human resources as well that administers the program. So it really, when employees waive it, it's usually because they have coverage elsewhere. So since we have a good existing plan, I would suggest that this compensation policy is actually not necessary. So I would recommend removal of this policy and just state that we're not going to be doing retroactive payments.
Well, just be sure nobody's using it right now, right?
Nobody is using it right now.
One person since 1995 has ever used it.
Yeah,
I believe that's right.
And I think what Laura is suggesting is something we need to do, including adding that new policy language that allows people to get back in if circumstances change.
Correct. So so essentially there would be two motions on Tuesday related to this item. One would be to remove this policy on employee health benefits and note that there would be no retroactive payments. And then the other one would be to establish a new policy regarding the district's commitment to offer participation in the benefits package. And that's what you see on the screen here. Hopefully it's not too small. Zoom in here. But essentially the policy is that the district will offer participation in its benefit package to all eligible full-time and part-time district employees. Benefits include health, dental, life insurance, retirement, and medical dependent care flexible spending account. This is our current benefit package. This portion of this policy was actually approved back in June, on June 22nd, 2020, during our board meeting as we were having discussions about VRS. So this is a great space for that to be incorporated in here as well. So for the purposes of benefit coverage, full-time is considered 30 hours or more per week, and part-time is considered 20 to 29 hours per week with regular and permanent employment status. So the rest of this essentially just is what qualifies as a qualifying event should our employees want to change their current coverage, and then also acknowledging that we have an annual open enrollment process as well. So my recommendation is to remove this old policy as it relates to employee health benefits and add the new policy that just demonstrates the district's commitment to offering participation in the benefits package. One thing I also want to note, as you saw here, is that as we're going through the review process, I think that, or if there's other conversations in other ways, I think we can add the specific elements of our benefits package with a little bit more detail, how often we're going to be reviewing them, and then also we really need to clarify the benefits that we're offering to retirees as well. So that's an area of our personnel policies that we just haven't really built out too much, and really need to take into some consideration.
So do I understand?
This looks real good. The only question I have is in the 5th line where it says within 30 days of a qualifying event. Is that a standard time frame?
It is a standard time frame, and really it has more to do with getting the information. Well, let me tell you why that's important. One, we want to make sure that folks can get into their new coverage as quickly as possible. As a small agency, though, we can be a little bit flexible, and usually if there is an issue, somebody's having a difficult time getting documentation and things like that, then we can wait a little while. We have that flexibility. So it's not necessarily a hard set in stone time frame for us, but we really do try to make sure that we're getting the coverage information and the change information within that 30 days. Employee can see the benefit of that as soon as possible.
I was just wondering about some of these events may be pretty traumatic, and the employee may not even realize this was an option or even thought about it till after 30 days. And does that put them outside of being able to take this benefit?
No. We can certainly make some accommodations, and that would be something certainly that I could bring to the board to discuss as well, and just make an adjustment as necessary, or if the board wanted to provide me with that level of authority, we could do that.
Well, in addition to the 30 days, Laura, should situations change for people, they also have the annual review or the annual opportunities to get in.
That's correct. That's correct.
Like open enrollment or
Yes,
whatever.
open enrollment.
Yes.
They might, suppose open enrollment's November and something happens in January and they lose their coverage. I just didn't want to be too restrictive if something happens.
We could put in a little something in here, or at the discretion of the board of directors.
Well, we need to talk about that. I'm not sure I would agree with that. But
I would
30
also,
days is adequate.
yeah, I would agree with you, John, because I think that actually potentially puts you up for more liability if you're putting in parameters on discretion, and that kind of falls into a very concerning line.
That's something for discussion.
Yeah.
But I certainly appreciate Laura's looking at this and making her recommendations. And hopefully somebody would be willing to make such a motion. I don't think it has to be very complex on Tuesday.
I want to just kind of note back to Chris's point. You're absolutely right. I mean, there are some very significant issues, such as the death of a dependent, death of a partner, that could result in being a very, very difficult situation. And I am hopeful that, if we maintain this as a 30 days, we can certainly be sincere, if there is a need to wait for 35 days or, something like that, but within a reasonable time frame. So
certainly look at that, Laura. But the one Chris mentioned, which is probably the most important or the most critical, would be if the open enrollment is, say, December or so, and something happens in January, they could end up, if they didn't do it right away, having to wait 11 months before they could be covered again.
No.
For the next open enrollment, if they didn't do it within the 30 days.
I see what you're saying. Yes, that is true.
So that's something for us to think about as we're solidifying what our policy is going to be.
That's true. We have had mid-year adjustments that have needed to be made. And while it is very much incumbent upon the employee to reach out to us, really to Heather and I, we're pretty aware of what's going on with each other. And so I kind of press the gas a little bit. If we're getting close to a 30-day period, which is already a standard for us, if we're getting pretty close to that, I'm really kind of like, okay, if you're going to make a change, you need to confirm one way or another. And then if they need to get us some documentation, we can get the documentation later. We know that they'll be fine with it, but we need to make that commitment within that 30 days. Does that make sense?
I'm comfortable, Laura, with what you just said, that you're paying attention to, as well as the person that's undergoing a traumatic or life-changing event.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, if
Yes.
it's that big, we're going to know about it.
Right. No, certainly being extremely empathetic during times.
And if there were some kind of horrible event that happened that we were unaware of, some kind of, tragic event, I would think that our board would be understanding. I mean, if you wanted to switch it to 60 days, I think that that's also reasonable. But I try to think back on, even some of the things that you have to do. And oftentimes, if it were a real tragic event, and there were some investigations that needed to happen, you might not have everything, but you would have some kind of death certificate in order to present that.
This says 30 days or as determined by the board. If it's that important and the person isn't aware and you guys aren't aware, but it needs to have some exceptions, leave it up to the board. Take it to the board and we'll approve it or disapprove it.
That makes sense.
Giving us the authority to waive the 30 days.
That makes sense. I hear a little consensus that the board approves of dissolving the previous policy and instituting a new one.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So we'll present this on Tuesday. Jerry, would you repeat what you said there just a moment ago? I still have discretion in my mind, but I want to make sure that what you said was really good.
Yeah,
So,
if everybody misses the 30-day deadline, and there are extenuating circumstances that the board can review and make an exception, that would cover the problem with somebody missing 30 days because of, or by the board of directors review approval or something. Yeah.
I'll work on that language just a little bit to make sure that it's the responsibility of the employee to communicate changes to coverage within 30 days of the qualifying event.
Right.
And as you think of language, Laura, you might share it with all of us, and then one of the board members will have to make a motion or make two motions, I guess, on Tuesday.
Correct. I'm going to put this down here because I think
That discovering that existing policy really surprised me when Laura brought it to my attention. And even Diane said it was bad policy and she wished it had gone away.
I didn't read it that closely, Laura. Did the existing policy allow coverage for a whole family, even if they waived it? I mean, how much were, if we were just paying
No.
for one individual's health care insurance?
That's a good question. No, if they waived coverage, they would only receive the equivalent of a one-party coverage.
Yeah.
Their own.
Right.
I tell you that to me, that doesn't, I mean, I'm not going to buck this, but to me, that's not too commonsensical as being a couple who both of us had, health insurance. I think now that we're totally different now than we were 20 years ago. It would have been to our advantage to each, for one of us to waive the cost, because the cost of the other one is higher if we both rely on one source of insurance. So if half the price would be paid by my employer, but we were employed with my wife's insurance, that would offset the increased costs. So what I'm hearing is one person has exercised this waiver out of how many people? How big a deal is it? I'm all for changing it. I have no problems with it, but I just wonder, has not been that big a deal.
Well,
one person.
No, one person right now, but the policy has not really been presented. So we had several past employees who waived coverage. So this policy has been really defunct. And as I mentioned, I mean, even myself, it would have been, I could have been receiving this for the last 8 years. And same with some of our past employees who have been with us for a long, long time, who have not participated in the program. So it's something that
did they get paid the equivalent value of what they waived? They didn't ask for the money.
They didn't ask for it.
No. So
Well,
it's
not too big a deal, but get rid of it.
Yes, get rid of it quickly.
Okay, fine.
so
The reason, Jerry, if a lot of employees would come back now and say, I haven't collected this for 7 or 8 years, but I'd like it now, just like with Laura, we're going to owe them all $60,000. We don't have the money.
Yeah, they probably never learned enough about the policy to know they could ask for it. So,
And if you really read what Laura put out, what happened to the one person who took it, once they lost it, they had kind of presumed that was part of their salary. And as soon as it was lost, then they started realizing what it really meant. Those things would be taxed.
why did they lose it?
They must have changed their situation.
they had a qualifying event and they chose to enter into the insurance program. And
But they never asked for the money because they waived.
No, this is the one person that took advantage of it.
Okay.
yeah, it was really developed for that one individual. That policy was developed for that one individual. So,
And then when they went back into the regular system, they thought their salary had been cut.
Oh,
Okay, let's continue.
let's continue on. Okay.
yeah.
Let's get on to governance. Laura, governance?
We're gonna jump into governance here. So let me share my screen again. So this is we have talked about this for quite some time, and certainly have heard some some information already during our meeting today. So again, this is for your feedback. But essentially what I'm recommending is, again, that we're setting up a ad hoc governance committee that can look at governance and operating procedures. And you'll see here that the purpose would be to review updates, very similar to our personnel policy document, but reviewing, update, and documenting our governance and operating procedures for our board of directors, which serves in a similar role to bylaws. We do not have bylaws as a government entity. We have the law that establishes our district that's in the Virginia Code and helps to describe some of the things that are our board's responsibilities. But there are some other things that I have heard over the last year really that we would like to see incorporated in here as well, to ensure that we can be a high performing board, improve transparency, provide some clarity on board responsibilities, policies and procedures, board staff relationships, all that kind of stuff. So the goals would really be to document our board-related policies and procedures. We have some already within our policy document, but to really restructure that whole section of our policy document and beef it up with additional information for our board. Clarify those roles and responsibilities of the executive director and the board of directors, as well as the individual officers. So almost in a way, sort of creating job descriptions, if you will, for our various officer positions. The job description is a little bit more.
Who are the
Sorry?
officers?
So Jerry, you were vice chair, just the vice chair, chair, secretary, treasurer, and maybe even also just describing the role of the extension officer, director as well. We'll review our existing policies and procedures, recommendations for any new ones where there may be gaps. And again, we would be working to bring this to the executive committee on a monthly basis over the next 6 months. The goal would also be to establish a board training and development program. I think we invest a lot in our staff to be high performing. It's good to just sort of refresh on things from time to time as well. And board governance is very different than management, and it's very different, especially for a board like ours. We have a whole lot of different people that we work with, who we're partners with. And just like we've been describing just a little bit ago, it's good to try to figure out how we all fit into that as well. Who do we respond to? How do we do things? But there's some great trainings. Monica was mentioning Blue Avocado is a great resource. There's nonprofit ready.org, which has some different trainings that talk more about the relationship of the executive director with the board, the relationship of the executive director with the chair, board relations, in being ambassadors, the big components of what boards are responsible for doing and things like that. So I think there's some great resources out there that, again, as we think about our board well into the future, if we can incorporate these in here, then we can have a high-performing board and high-performing board members as well. Also, as part of governance, just in general, you all do my annual reviews. It's always good to set up time as the board to evaluate the board. How are we doing? Are we meeting our strategic plans? Do we feel like we've got, the resources available? Do we have the right committees in place? What's the temperature? Are there any concerns that folks have? What's coming up down the pike? Are we finding that individual board members may have increased pressures on their own time to be able to contribute to the district? So it's a good way. Oftentimes those evaluations are set up biannually, so every 2 years. And it's just, again, a temperature check for the board to be able to just, again, sort of check in. How are we doing kind of stuff.
Can I make a suggestion too for this? I mean, since I'm not on this team, I just want to reiterate something because I think we need to be very careful. Although we are elected, for those of us that are elected, and we come from possibly supporting parties, we should be re-emphasizing our nonpartisanship as much as possible. I think it's extraordinarily important for us to be as nonpartisan in our public-facing space because, in fact, the environment shouldn't be. And I think that we never know who's elected and in our supervisors, and we have to get along with everyone. And so I think it's really important, especially when we're in public and we're in these spaces that we see our role as being this nonpartisan space and making sure that we respect that.
I'd agree with that. You know, there are 3 of us that are board members elected by the voters. And I think we're elected to be a board that governs. And governance of board, in this case, is a board issue and not an executive director issue. And I've taken master's level courses in the principles of corporate governance and done a lot of case analysis from Harvard Business Review. And one of the fundamental principles is the separation of the board and the management, and that the management acts as an agent of the board. And I'm a little concerned that there are no elected members on the review team, and that there are 2, a past and a existing executive directors who will be developing policies of how the board should perform. So I'd be very interested in being on that team.
I actually think having someone not elected might be a better space, but that's just.
I'm not saying take Adria off, but I'm saying I'd like to be on it too.
I think Monica was only saying that we're all elected, and I've been elected also. We're all elected as independents.
Exactly.
And how we portray ourselves in public should comply with that.
Yeah, that's
right.
what I was meaning.
Yeah, I agree with that. But what I'm talking about is setting up the government procedures, or the governing procedures should be a board decision, not executive director's decision.
But Adria's there.
I agree.
And I think here's the thing. These things would all come before the board.
Right.
Yes.
And in so many ways, you're going to have this team do the same thing as a personnel team or even the TRC.
Right.
that there is that. I think, one of the main things that we need to understand is that, this committee can definitely help with reviewing policies, but also our own transparency, whether if it's to the public or other partners, and clarification and building that trust.
So that's not the part that concerns me. I'm more concerned about our fiduciary and legal liability responsibilities, whether or not we're covered by insurance from DCR or not. That's what board members do.
Yes, but Adria is on the board, on this review team. So why would that be of concern if there's a representation there?
Well, I think you have 2.
I think we're talking about governance. Everything trickles down from that. I would not be opposed to this being a total board responsibility, but recognizing that Diane and Laura bring a lot of history in this and thinking about what they can and can't do, I totally agree with them on it. I doubt whether an associate director should be the chair of this committee. I love Diane. I worked with her for a lot of years. But governance, we're talking about governance, and we're having a past executive director who's now an assistant director.
Let me back up for a second.
Diane has quite some experience doing governance. She's been.
I'm talking about the appearances, and I think Diane's going to have a lot of good ideas. I love that she's helping, but we're talking about governance here, and we're appointing her as the chair.
So Diane has been the governance committee chair for a number of other nonprofit organizations, and I served as well on a governance chair when I served on the Nova Parks board. So I think what I'm hearing from you, Jerry, is you're concerned about the perception.
Yes.
As a chair, really, the intent is to facilitate the dialogue, right?
Yeah.
I wonder even about the designation of a chair. These are supposed to be review teams. They're not committee assignments. We're not. This is people deliberating on something to present to the board, which makes the decision. So maybe chair worrying about who's the chair and who's not chair might be.
If we treat this as we did the personnel group, these are going to be kind of working groups, aren't they?
Yeah.
Making recommendations to the board.
That's right.
So what difference does it make if Diane chairs that one, or Adria does, or anybody does?
I mean, really, Harry chairs the Saturday green breakfast. So I'm not sure it really is something to be getting hung up on a title, and especially, you have a resume of someone whose career was spent in governance. So I'm not really sure. And I also just want to warn everyone from creating review teams that become the size of an entire board. I just think that becomes counterproductive.
It does, and the board has to review and accept and adopt all of their work anyway, or reject it.
Well, yeah, Laura has worked in, like I said earlier, three different reviews by the everybody who attends the executive operations committee meeting. That's good. I think though that, like my comment on what is not in the personnel management memo that she wrote, what things we're initially skipping over, will be brought up later if anybody thinks about it. Those decisions if the board ratifies it without asking the question, what's not here, then the chair and the people on the review team, they are important. What they decide to say and what options they considered, maybe didn't share with the rest of the board, I think could be important. So I trust that all the people working on these review teams are as transparent as we hope they would be in saying, here's what we talked about. Here are the pros and cons of each, and here's what we recommend. Not just, here's our draft, accept it.
I think that's fair, Jerry. Absolutely.
Good.
By the way, interestingly enough, the elected members of a 5-person board outnumber the appointed members. And so that's, I think, strategically what was designed to happen.
Yeah.
I just think that for a board governance, their board members should be leading and be the majority of the team.
What do you hear from Elaine, Laura? Is what's that on her tentativeness?
So I have tentative next to Elaine because I've reached out to her. We are planning on just touching base tomorrow at some point tomorrow. So I haven't introduced this fully to her yet to even see if she has the time.
Oh, okay. Great.
Elaine is an associate director with us right now, but she's a former director,
right.
And now is a current public school board member as well. So I think what I was looking at on the review team was a real broad perspective, and what are the wide variety of resources that are available that help, get through some of those challenging times for boards, as well as help with the board training and development program. Orientation of boards is challenging. And really, when we look at the orientation for our board, and we've referred to it a number of different times, there's really no good introduction to how to be on a board that is offered through the state association or on a regular basis, I should say, through state association or through DCR, any of those other groups. And yet there's there really is an art to being on the board. There's an art to the Robert's Rules of Order, and some of the different kinds of things that we do. That if we have every 4 years the potential of getting 3 new directors, we want to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for good succession planning as well, with our board, and good onboarding of our board as well. I've been through in 8 years now. I've been through many different board members, and every time we get a little bit better. But I think that there's some challenges that we run into because of some of the documentation that we don't have, and some of the documentation that is available. It can get very, very confusing, and I think we're finding that right now. So I think that's again why when looking at the review team, there's a number of groups that can bring information together. I like having the idea of having Adria on here. As you all know, Adria does not serve in an officer position, and as an appointed member, her role is really unique because she sort of serves as our Switzerland. She's sort of neutral ground, if you will, and she helps to facilitate and have conversation with a lot of different folks. So that was, sort of the impetus behind some of the decisions that were made. But certainly it's not intended to be exclusionary.
Right. And I think, notwithstanding the comment about having the review teams be as big as the board, I would like to see Elaine on it. I always appreciated the judgments that I saw her make, and almost universally agreed with her. So I think she'd be a good addition.
Did you say she makes a good addition because you universally agreed with her? I love that.
The only question with
great,
Elaine, the only question with Elaine would be, does she have the time?
Right.
Does she have
Well,
the
let's
time?
hope. Yeah.
Well, we'll find out tomorrow, right?
I will find out tomorrow, and certainly I think that she would love to participate and help out with this. And it may be that she couldn't necessarily attend meetings, and again, she's got a lot on her plate with the school board. But could she contribute information? She certainly could, and that's again, if the team preparing the recommendations, because I want to make that clear as well for both the personnel policy review process. So. And for this one, we would be providing recommendations that ultimately would be reviewed by the Executive Operations Committee. So we would all review it together. And then it would be whatever changes would need to take place after that conversation would be approved by the board, or reviewed once again and approved by the board. So
I think one of the things that maybe I'm not seeing or understanding, so I've been on the board the longest out of all of you. And oftentimes I do try to stay quiet and listen to you and be that person who is the most diplomatic, bipartisan as possible. While my political views lean towards the more liberal side, I certainly don't push them on anyone on the board. And I certainly wouldn't want anyone to feel uncomfortable. My job also as your extension representative is to be a constant on the board and to be that constant and for technical review, but also to just be that sounding board, that reason. So I think while you might be concerned about me as an appointed member, I'm not going anywhere. And I haven't been anywhere for, a very long time. I've been here, and I've also seen a lot of changes on the board, and we've also developed a lot of policies since Laura has started as our executive director. I've seen nothing but, structure and organization that we didn't always have. And I think that that's based on some of the needs that we have with new staff and new generations of staff in so many ways too. We've also changed a lot of policies, even with the county and even with the changes that we've had. And I think that I have my finger on the pulse of what's going on with the county on one side of things. And if Laura and I sometimes will talk, we know a lot of the things that are truly going on based on some of the interconnections that I have and that she has.
I totally agree with you.
So I don't want you to discount my appointedness, so
No,
to
I think
speak, on the board.
Chris was just commenting on the fact that there was not that you were on the board, but there was no elected board member there. That's all. Right,
Mhm.
Chris?
Yes, and the agency issue where the executive director is an agent of a board, and so the board should be deciding what concerns their governance, not executive directors.
And that is right. This is a review team. This is not a decision team that is being developed. This is a team that is being developed to review things and then make recommendations to the board.
Yeah, I agree. There's homework.
And then the board would then make those approvals of the recommendations or send us, the review team, back to the drawing board.
Yeah, I would hope in that regard, Adria, that I see some of the executive operations committees come just a few days after the working meetings. Getting something as important as these things we're working on the day of the board meeting doesn't lead to much deliberation.
I'm kind of, sorry, Jerry, you're making a great point, and I thought that exact same thing, which is why on the first one I put update to the Executive Operations Committee, because I didn't think we would have a whole lot for you to be able to review at that point.
Okay.
Maybe we could, but probably we would just be providing an update then.
Oh,
And then in March, right, and then in March we would. This is what we did. Here's where we're at. This is kind of just again giving a brief update. Then in March we would have more probably that came from February, possibly some things that yes, we would be really reviewing the draft recommended policies from that would have been developed during that first meeting. So that would be what would be presented for review at the Executive Operations Committee, and then an update on, hey, we're looking at board trainings and things like that. So that's why you see the process the way that it is.
Yeah, thank you.
I agree. And I also, here's my perspective as being someone who's new and coming in also, having a review committee that's looking at governance that has been a part of soil and water for decades, and then bringing it to some of us who are potentially a little newer, to review and kind of have a new idea and a fresh idea, say, oh, but we didn't hit on this or we didn't hit on that. And so I really appreciate, this being presented to us and then being able to move from there.
This is John. I'd like to say one more thing about elected and appointed directors since it has come up. When it comes to our roles as board members on a conservation district, there's no difference between the roles of an elected or appointed director. The difference comes only in the numbers of each.
Thank you, John. A good thing to put into the training.
Are we all in agreement that we'll go forward with this governance working group, or whatever we're going to ultimately call it?
Yeah.
And if so, we'll have to ratify that, I guess, or solidify our decision on Tuesday.
I'm for going ahead. I think although the idea of a government committee was new to me this morning when I got Laura's email, I'm all for it. If in the best of all worlds we had years to do this, the governance committee maybe ought to come first. But I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We're starting off the personnel review team with the very first mission being authorities and whatever, and at the same time starting a process is going to do kind of the same thing. But yeah, walk and chew gum. And I think it's another reason for both of those committees where it'd be good to get outside input from Debbie and this lady from Henricopolis if she's available.
We might want to think too about what we really call them. Are they going to be working groups?
Review team, yeah,
Review team.
Just don't make it a formal committee. I don't see any reason for making it a formal committee, unless Laura just wants to do FOIA advertising.
I love FOIA. I appreciate that. I think we can call them whatever we want. And I think, again, we just need to be careful in regards to, we'll still have to take notes and things like that for each meeting and just have those available. But, and if, I want to just make sure that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's so that there isn't the perception that, well, we're calling it a review team, but it could be a committee or, things like that. So I like the idea of having some formality. And again, before
review teams.
That's fine, but I think we need to have that formality and board motion to say this as a board, we're agreeing to move in this direction. Those are going to be some things that I think, help with the formality of doing some of these large projects that we're really all in it together.
So are you saying you would like to have public notification about these review team meetings?
I made myself a note, Jerry, to go back and check FOIA open meeting laws and perhaps even get an opinion on it from the FOIA Council. I just don't want to be caught too late in saying, oh, well, you really should have been having these as regular committee meetings. So I just need to get into the weeds of FOIA a little bit and just make sure that we're covering our 6.
And if a little more effort gives us more latitude about who comes and participates, then I'm fine. I just was trying to save you some effort.
No, I appreciate that. Just having meeting dates and times is really beneficial, and having those planned out, it makes it much easier to just, advertise. That's really the big point of what we're going to need to be doing. Okay. We'll have, some minutes and things like that come out, or some meeting summaries that come out of these as well.
Great.
Anyway. Any other questions? So just in regards to the timeline, as you saw, this group would be meeting monthly, so probably a little bit longer meetings, but meeting monthly and then providing those updates to the Executive Operations Committee. And again, no governance committee meetings would take place in April unless they were necessary. Just again, giving us a little bit of space for the wide variety of other activities that are taking place there in April, because we would like for all of our committee members and the board members and associates and everybody to be able to participate in the seedling sale and have the time to be able to do that. Okay.
Time for strategic planning.
So we've got a little less than 30 minutes for strategic planning, which is not quite the time frame that we were looking to do, but I really appreciate the feedback on all of those policies. It was really, really important. Okay, so let's launch into strategic planning, and I will, oops, hold on a second. I just messed myself up. I have 2 screens, which is amazing, but I get confused with them from time to time. Okay, so you hopefully can see this. Jerry, can you see this okay?
Yes.
Okay.
I can see it.
Okay, great. So Jerry and I, as you all may recall, Jerry was kind enough to step up and agree to support the strategic planning process. And he and I met just a couple of weeks ago to kind of go through what the proposed process was. And we discussed this actually back in April, May, maybe. And we've been doing some activities since then in order to get going. But first phase has really been sort of our evaluation phase. It's evaluating and reviewing our existing programs. Hopefully everybody has a copy of our strategic plan. If not, let me know and I will send you a copy right after this meeting. There's a lot of information that's in it, and there are a lot of new things, a lot of things that we have established over the last 4 years that I'm really proud of, and I know you are too. And there's a lot of things that are coming down the pike as well that are also very exciting. So we're kind of doing, again, a bit of a temperature check and evaluating our current programs and looking at emerging issues and needs. Our team, the staff have done a SWOT analysis. Right now, they're revisiting that. They completed the SWOT analysis back in May and June, which was a time of great trepidation. And we're revisiting that as a group and seeing since that time, are there any changes to the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that they would like to make. Jerry and I kind of serve as our strategic planning committee. We've gotten together and have talked, and it's time for the board and associates to do their own SWOT analysis. And so we're going to begin that today. And then what I'm hoping is be able to give you our starting point. That's we're going to wrap up here in 20 minutes or so, and then give that back to you so that you can continue to work on that. And then we'll find some time for another work session or to get together and compare notes. Between now and really our next meeting in late February, I am working with our partners, this says a virtual work session for them. It's really virtual work sessions. I'm going to be going and talking with a number of our important partners. And I know that, Monica, you've reached out to board members and you all have great relationships with some of our elected officials in the area. And I would like to encourage you to continue communicating with them and identifying what they see as being some needs for their constituents and how we can continue to support them. We released a stakeholder survey back in June, and we do have some information from that as well. I'm not going to share too much with you because I really want to make sure that we're not biasing your information too early here. We will then convene as a group and start to define more of our strategic direction. And we're going to affirm or reaffirm our vision and mission statements, make sure that that's still what we want to be striving for. We'll review the SWOT analysis results. We'll review all the recommendations that come from our partners, and we'll work to define define our objectives and perhaps various actions that we want to complete over the next 4 years as well. With that, the board is going to be involved in developing that implementation approach and again, refining things down even further. And I will be working with you to support you through this, of course. And then working toward that final plan that we hope to again then roll out at the end of June and for a July 1st implementation date. And then annually, as board and the staff, we're going to review our progress. I do hope that we develop and continue to develop our performance measures. We're going to consider what our resource requirements are going to be as part of our budget process, and then prioritize or reprioritize actions as necessary. Does that sound good?
Sounded a good process, Laura. I think I asked you when we last talked, I'm not sure what the answer was. I think you did not like the idea of sharing the SWOT analysis that the staff has already done.
Not yet, right. I really don't want to bias your opinions on.
Come up with our top of our brain entries before we will be looking at the staff SWOT analysis.
Oh, yes. So right now the staff are revisiting the SWOT analysis to determine whether or not there's any changes that they would like to make to it. And it's been since June, so over 6 months since they last, really reviewed it. So a lot has happened in the last 6 months in terms of this virtual world kind of becoming more normalized. So it may be that there are no changes to their SWOT analysis, but I want to give them the opportunity to revisit it.
Okay. At what point were we going to take the staff? I think the staff has got a lot to advise us on. They're out there doing this work.
Oh yes.
And at what point are we going to meld the boards, the associates, and staff responses?
Well, we're going to have a work session with everybody, and including staff, board, and associates. And again, that's when we will review that SWOT analysis. But that information will be available prior to that meeting too.
Okay.
No,
So
absolutely.
They're right in the middle is where we look at everybody's SWOT.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah, this is really important. I say work session, it may be sessions, plural, in order to make sure that we can get through all of this, because it's a lot of information to unpack, and a lot of things that, you know, again, can you know, give us some things to really think about as we head into the next 4 years. So yes, it really, the board sets the vision, but the vision and the strategic direction, but it's based upon input from all aspects of the organization.
Staff and partners absolutely agree.
Yeah.
I agree with your unbiasing approach, but I'd like to see what the staff has. And it's a tough year when you don't get to see them and while you're eating grapes or cookies or muffins and chatting.
Or
catch up on other things besides, you know, the formalities of VCAP or whatever's going on. So I'd like to see their input, you know, a few days before we have discussion on it, just to process it and think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we're going to jump into a SWOT analysis, and I can only see myself, Jerry, Adria, and Chris, but have you all completed SWOT analysis for your own organizations and things like that in the past, Jerry? I see you shaking your head no.
Yes.
Hugely detailed ones on a whole wide range of subjects.
Okay, so Chris has, Monica has. John, have you ever, you called it something else. What did you call it, a SWAT? You're muted. John, you're muted.
I've done a number of those, but it's never been called SWOT or SWAT, as you like to call it.
What do you call it?
Oh, I don't remember.
Okay, all right. And Adria, have you done something like this before? You may be muted too.
Yes, I am muted, and yes, my answer was yes, I've done stuff like this before, different things, and we also kind of we do this for our office, but also, you know, statewide. So.
Yeah, so I'll just go through it briefly since most of you have done this, and again, I'm going to share this whole PowerPoint with you. You received it already, but I will share with you the modified version as well once we go through it. But a SWOT it's a technique, and there's a wide variety of different techniques that are available to kind of take a look at your organization. But this is really a very nice, straightforward way. We're looking at both internal and external factors that are favorable and unfavorable to meeting our goals. So that's just, you know, again, something that we can. A way of being able to kind of take a look at our organization as a whole and do it in a little bit of a systematic way. So the tool itself is really helpful. As you notice these 4 bullet points here, we're going to look at new solutions to problems. We can identify barriers and things that limit us. We can decide if there's going to be more effective ways of doing things. And then we can also take a look at where there are some additional possibilities or you know, if we have any concerns, you know, about change. So the way that I have set up our SWOT is basically it's the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That's what SWOT stands for. Your strengths are really looking at what we have internally and what is positive. So it is those factors that differentiate us from our peers. So it's what are our distinctive advantages? What are our unique resources that we have that may be superior to others or may be really unique? What kind of services do we provide that are really unique? And then, you know, again, just sort of taking a look at what our strengths are as well. So as you see here, we get a chance to kind of pat ourselves on the back. These are the things that our partners and our, you know, and ourselves, our customers, things that we really shine with that they know. On the flip side, we also need to identify what's going on that may be negative. What are our weaknesses? So looking again internally, These are our limitations. These are the defects that we might have within our organization that can prevent us from achieving our objectives. So it could be inferior capabilities, inferior resources when we're comparing ourselves to some of our peers. And these may be the things that some of our customers or partners may also recognize. Externally, what else is going on outside that's positive? Where are there those opportunities? So they could be anything that may be current or perspective, trends that we're looking at, or changes that really would support the demand for our programs and for our services as well. It's maybe opportunities to enhance our services or establish new ones too. So, and then again, on the flip side, on the negative side, what are our threats? What are our external threats? What are those things that create those unfavorable situations? Or they may be trends, they may be impending change, they may be uncertainties that we have that could be potentially damaging to us or threaten our ability for being able to provide programs and services in the way that we would like. So they could be barriers, constraints, can be, again, these are external things. We are identifying our weaknesses above, but these are external things that really could impact our organization.
Laura, a question on that external threat.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I hope it's not just changes in impending changes in our district, but also outside our district. There are a lot of threats coming from other organizations currently.
Give us an example, John.
Well, USDA is putting out money to all kinds of organizations in the conservation business that are not conservation districts.
Oh.
Well, do something to stop that. Laura, we were thinking about, people had done SWOT analysis. I was trying to think of the other acronym because it's a different process. But one of the things that we did on top of the SWOT analysis, and we were encouraged to think about at the same time, is a gap analysis. When you look at strengths and opportunities or weaknesses and opportunities or a way to be defensive against threats, what do you need to bridge that gap to get from one to another? And that often creates a way of thinking that you're not just making a list, but you're trying to figure out what you have to do.
Absolutely. And that's actually something that we did with the staff. So there was one more slide here. I didn't think we were going to be able to get to it today, where we looked at the strategies. How would we address those strengths and threats? Or how can we use our strengths to, address the threats or things like that? Where are the weaknesses really going to impact our future opportunities? So really getting into exactly what you're talking about and trying to get to strategies. And that's what I look forward to having with our next conversation as well. So it's good. But we're getting right there, and I'm definitely hear that one of the threats is the competition for NRCS funding with non-district organizations. But let's go to strengths. And these questions here are just really to prompt us, and give us some ideas to just get started. But really, we're looking at what does the district already do well? What are the unique resources that we can draw on? What do partners see as our district strengths? And then what would you say is our biggest achievement? So I'd like to just kind of go around and start to write some of these down. Really only have a few minutes, so maybe we'll take 2 minutes per each one of these and just kind of get started. Unless you guys are okay with going for another 10 minutes or so.
I'm fine.
I can go.
Yeah.
I think we could go for a little bit longer to gather our ideas if we get them rolling.
Okay. We'll try to go for maybe, 5 to 10 minutes per each one of these, and we'll just see until we run out of ideas. So tell me about what you see as being some of our strengths.
I'd say the staff, and you can just say that to mean a whole bunch of things.
Okay.
Residential consultations.
I would say we are considered a connecting entity, meaning we connect different partners.
Yeah.
And I would say as a state agency, not a county agency, we're not limited in what we can do by constraints that counties have.
What was that, Jerry?
We're not constrained in what we can do by what counties are constrained in what they do.
Right.
What they can't do on private property that we can.
Yeah, we can play that mediating role.
Mediating and provide services.
If we're talking about our strengths as a conservation district, we're unique in Virginia in that we have skills on our staff that no other district has.
Right.
So that's one thing. The other thing is we're unique as a district in that our area is primarily urban. And we deal with conservation practices that most districts in the United States don't have to deal with.
And we have a wealthy county that is willing to give us some funding without a lot of constraints.
Amen.
Like in stormwater utility particularly.
Our education, I think, is really strong. It's a kind of a broad space, but I think our educational outreach is really just extraordinary.
Well, not only that, but being in an area with a major university, we have a pool of talent, both as interns and employees, that a lot of other districts in the state don't have.
I think
One of the other things we have that most districts don't have is the competence of the partners we deal with. We probably have more competent partners than most districts ever associate with.
John, which partner specifically would you say?
I'm talking about home builders. I'm talking about contractors. I'm talking about our agronomic folks. I'm talking about a whole host of people. I think all of us realize how unique we are up here in this county, but I'm not sure even in other urban areas in the United States, they have the level of talent that we do that we work with regularly.
Yeah, I'd ratify that. Yeah, I know setting up Fairfax Master Outpost, it was awe-inspiring to see the kind of talent we could draw on to be our instructors. And that's just because of the education and experience levels of the population.
Absolutely.
And that has to do with our residences who we serve too. A lot of the VCAP participants are pretty well informed about what we're offering them and what they can do with it.
Part of that comes from being so close to the nation's capital because we have tremendous talent in this region that isn't available anyplace else in the United States.
You bet.
I think we're situated in a good place in that same realm where you're talking, John, as far as the federal go, because we have, unique opportunities to show off our local programs to such a wide national audience.
Yeah.
Sorry for cutting you off there, Monica.
That's okay.
And Adria, most of the rest of the national audience that sees what we're doing really appreciates it.
I think that's great. That's a good job, you guys. That's a great start. I hope we all feel like, woohoo, we are really good.
One more thing that we have going for us that not any other district I don't think has, and that's our closeness to some of the federal natural resource agencies themselves. For example, you've dealt with the Department of Interior, you've dealt with USDA on a national basis, on a headquarters basis, which no one else gets to do.
Yeah, and you have meetings in your backyard with PhD retired USGS folks that are working on phosphorus uptake in invasive species and written papers on it. That's something you don't get everywhere.
I'll tell you one of the things that came up on the staff side that you all didn't note about what we do well is this. Supportive board. We have a supportive board, supportive, and I also would say innovative board.
Well, I would also say innovative executive director, because I think that you know, as the staff and the leadership also has kind of has moved this forward.
A lot of the stuff I implied when I just said staff, there's so many good benefits in there that you could fill up that whole square.
Yep.
I think that's great. So let's go. We're gonna kind of ping pong. We're gonna kind of go through a little bit of a roller coaster here. But let's take some time and talk about what we could improve on.
I'm gonna go with.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I mean, I think this is just something that's been highlighted across everywhere from the pandemic is I think that there's opportunity. Well, I guess I shouldn't say opportunity, but, you know, I think outreach from a communication standpoint, you know, there's target audiences, I think that we could probably improve in connecting with.
Any specific targets?
Well, I think, you know, from a lot of the conversations I've had, not a lot of people know what Soil and Water Conservation District is. So we have to be cognizant that while we give ourselves kudos for the amazing talent that does exist, those people that understand that, you know, really applaud us. But there's a majority of people that don't know who we are.
Like most of the people you met when you were campaigning.
Was that Monica?
Or most of the people in the county, considering that we have 1 million people in the county.
Yeah, you know, as much as that's accurate, it's also traditional and historic. That's gone on for 60 years. We used to call it the Secret Conservation Service and the Secret Conservation District.
Sure.
Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed.
Cooperative Extension is known as the best kept secret,
If we can come up with a way to get people to recognize these independent jurisdictions, we'd really be doing something nationally.
Right?
John, suppose we changed our name to Secret Conservation District, then people would see the name and they'd think something was secret. They want to know about it.
Yeah.
They dig. They do the digging. But you know, having dealt with the public in a lot of different spheres, I was a sanitarian, for instance, with the Prince William County Health Department. There are a lot of people who don't own any resources that they would manage to the benefit of soil and water. A lot of people who can't get around to fixing the furnace filter. They're just too busy. I think there's a large percentage of our, 1.3 million people who are never going to be interested in what we do. So I don't think we have to moan about that. As long as the people who can be interested are know where to come, I think we're doing a pretty good job on that. And as long as we give them good information and provide services, I think we're doing a good job at that. The green breakfasts, the participation with Plant Nova natives, there's a lot of things we're doing that are right in line. Can we do better? I'd like to do in ways too.
Jerry, we're specifically trying to be negative here.
It's hard to be negative.
I wouldn't argue with that, Jerry. I think you're right.
That's supposed to be a positive, huh? Okay.
I know it's hard to be negative when you love something.
That's true. I want everybody to practice natural landscaping, but you know, a lot of people just don't listen.
So are there any areas within our district that you feel like we don't have enough resources that other districts have, or that other organizations, other partners might see as weaknesses?
We need a media representative and a marketing. Clearly, if we want more people to learn about us, having some kind of media or marketing. I know we have outreach representative, and Ashley does a wonderful job, but this is something that is so, the same thing that I think a lot of small organizations go through, and even nonprofits is, they're the best kept secret.
I actually think that you could put that as part of a strength too, because I think, Lori, your biggest strength is the networking and marketing and getting our ability to do things out there.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're lucky with your talents in that. And, you know, I don't know much about Ashley, but it seems like she's out there a lot too, but there's just so much out there to get to.
But yeah, I mean, I know you both had an opportunity to connect today, Chris, and I'm sure she's really great about the things that she does do, and you'll see on the board report, and I know she shared this with you too, that she's going to be presenting on her programs on Tuesday and what she was able to really accomplish during this pandemic time, and how I think it's a great example of how we've pivoted, but we've had to pivot all of our programs in terms of being able to provide services and continue to help try to meet demand, because it is still very, very high. I would say that's both a strength and a threat. Demand for our services is high.
Yeah, our population size is high. I think that's a negative. The diversity in our demographics is so vast. And I think that it's a negative in just capacity.
Translating into languages that we may not have that capacity on staff or even at the county at our disposal. You know, there's language translation services, but the county is limited in their resources. Something else that I would say that COVID really kind of, these are if we're going to look at it this way as far as weaknesses go, what are some things that, you know, we found as a organization that COVID did to us? And we right now are developing committees or developing review teams like the personnel and the governance and different groups, because we came in with a new board. And then 3 months later, we were in a pandemic, and now we're sitting and looking at each other at 2D pictures on a screen. So if we want to kind of look at it in that realm, what were we challenged with? We were challenged with equipment that was adequate for our staff in the beginning of this quarantine. We're there now, but even these headphones and speakers, we were, you know, sending each other. Christina was in my office. I gave her the code to get into my office and where to find headphones for an event that she had. We were trading speakers and leaving them for each other at different places. It's almost like that too.
You responded very well in that. There's a lot of groups that failed pretty badly. It took a long time to get.
And they still are challenged. There are some groups that are still challenged with some of this virtual stuff. And I think that it just shows the organization, the strength. I mean, Laura and I have always had a team personality when it comes to anything. If she needed equipment, I would lend it to her in a heartbeat. So I think we have to write that, is that we're not always flush with computers and stuff when it comes to county. For a while there, we were getting hand-me-downs, you know.
And I want to just say, I mean, these are some of the things, in a way, this activity is sort of a snapshot in time, but it's something that every year, and certainly from my perspective, when we have the opportunities to kind of reflect on our organization, what our needs are, it comes to play, which is why we established the 5-year rotational computer replacement program and the 10-year vehicle replacement program, so that we could get into this consistency to address exactly what you're talking about, Adria, which is it's really, really difficult to to try to stay high functioning when you're really not sure when you're going to be able to bring these resources to the table. Yeah,
that's an accolade for the foresight of previous boards to apportion that funding so you could respond to some, both with the truck and the computers.
Laura, can I make another comment under external threats on that second bullet?
Sure.
I think Jerry made that point, and it's an accurate point, but it's no different than farms that are rented, and those folks still have access to conservation district services. And so do our people that maybe don't own the resources that they're overseeing or managing, but they have access to our services. Now, are we making sure they understand that?
Good point.
So let me see here. So that there was a couple of different things there. I heard a strength, which is the services are available to all landowners and property managers. And the weakness is we may not, well,
So
it's kind of getting down here. Property owners.
Well, the people that are renting, for example, don't maybe
Renters.
understand they have access to our services, and they do.
Tenants do too, right?
Well, that's an opportunity.
It's both.
Okay, we're jumping around a little bit. So
Yes.
I want to make sure that we're let me put that down here real quick so I don't lose it.
Well, I was looking at Jerry's second bullet, which is accurate. It's people that don't own the resources, don't or have the time to focus on them.
Yes, this is true.
Those people have access to our services, but probably don't know it.
Right, which is why I wrote down a lot of people don't own the resources that would benefit from our services or they don't have the time to focus on them. So I'm gonna be really cheeky here, and I'm gonna require you to focus over here on weaknesses and try to see if we can complete this one here real quick. But I want to just make sure. I know it's really hard. I think Monica, you said it so well. It's really hard to share the weaknesses when you love something so much, and that when you appreciate what it is that we as an organization do. But I think it's also really important that we be critical when we're thinking about this, and we can be constructive later as we're, kind of thinking about, things about.
Let me offer a suggestion on that area. You've heard me in the past ask for information on comparative benefits of different practices compared to their costs. And this is also an opportunity, and also goes to the point about having expertise available. I would like to see us develop an ability to answer issues like Chairman Harity often raises as the sole objection to some of the things the board does. That he wants to see balance in what we do, and a lot of the recipients of our services would probably like to see, what's most cost effective for me? What's the least cost way to do this? How much of this can I do myself, et cetera, et cetera? And we don't have the information to be able to support that. For instance, Willie, I'm not blaming Willie, but apparently he hasn't updated his cost increase for the urban area from a sample of 3 some years before I even got associated with the district. We need to be, I think we can set ourselves up because of our neutral position as cost analyses for a lot of people that work here in the county, federal, state, and local. To be able, for instance, a thing going on right now is carbon sequestration. What is the comparative benefit between starting a forest versus putting in solar cells on grassed areas? How do you compare those two? I think solar cells are probably going to win, but how much? It may be better to say we shouldn't be putting any solar cells on turf, over turf, when we could put them over parking lots, and we can get 35% of the carbon benefit by starting a forest over that turf. We don't have the ability to give people definitive answers to those kind of questions. I think there's a need for those answers, and I think that, like, we have the only soil scientist apparently in the country, in the district. I'd like to see us have maybe the only economic environmental economist in the country. I think there's a real need for getting good answers, comprehensive answers, when we say, yes, we're for this, and be able to explain quantitatively why we're for it. So that's also an opportunity. Since nobody has that economic capability, we could fill that gap.
Jerry, those were good points, and they're kind of things I was going to lead to in kind of a complex observation of a weakness and an opportunity. Is the weakness is our staff in our experience matrix. We are heavily skewed towards older, more experienced people. And what that does is doesn't allow us to evaluate staff motivation, manage staff retention possibilities, manage burnout, because the senior people are doing the same thing over and over. And there's no junior folks for them to delegate to or mentor or, build a more structured management program. And what that does is prohibits the Willies and the Dans, our real technical expertise, from being able to stick their head above the floodwaters and think for a little bit about how do we look at phosphorus loadings or the effectiveness of the county stream restoration programs or the economic benefits that you were just talking about, or the long-term benefits of our VCAP projects, or being able to do smaller innovative projects that are personally interesting to our senior folks, similar to the Alexandria soils work, but I don't know that we want to go out and only have a soil point staff. But I think we have a weakness in that we don't have junior field people to augment our senior folks and to let them grow in the organization and really let them sit and think a little bit about what they can do. And some of that's opportunities as well as weaknesses. And on the opportunities side, I don't know.
Hold on. Oh, before we get to opportunities, I want to make sure we're getting through weaknesses. Can you hold on to that, Chris?
Well, it still fits in there in that in order to counteract this in the gap analysis side is, can we provide some level of funding to the Willies and the Dans and give them some ability, to pursue things, with discussion that are interesting? Because I think, talking to Dan in the past, he's been involved in a variety of other things that he's added input in, but with the green sheets and the VCAP and the other stuff, he's pretty swamped.
So you're saying to add additional staff positions, Chris?
Yes, I think we need a junior person or two.
Okay.
But that goes into, Laura, the discussion you brought to before and the threat of the reliability of our funding. You mentioned the $300,000 opportunity before. Anything new on that?
Yes. So I actually shared this at the TRC, and we will be bringing this up to the board here probably in the next several weeks. But I've mentioned this several times over the last several months. That I've been working with stormwater planning, and there's been a memorandum that's been developed for Bryan Hill that has been sent to the Board of Supervisors. So the 300,000 was reduced to 150,000 after there was more information that was provided by DMB as a result of basically COVID and some of the concerns in the future. But there is still funding set aside in that for staffing, which is good. That would be going through the board approval process a little bit separate from the budget, but we do intend that it will be coming up before the board's environmental committee, possibly in March. So I'm still waiting to get some news about that from.
So if we get it in
from stormwater planning,
how do we manage it with staff who I assume are pretty overloaded right now?
Chris, it's supplemental. It's really, honestly, it's a dedicated source of funds. So our process wouldn't really change so much. The only process that would change would be, instead of it going to the state association, the final approval would be from our board of directors. So it would be handled very similarly to CAP. And if we needed to go through the full VCAP process, then we could do that. But I don't want to get too far off topic, because I want to make sure that, I know John needs to leave at 6 o'clock. So, but I can certainly follow up with you with some more information on this as well.
Laura, can I ask you a question? And I'm sorry if this is a dumb question. I'm assuming if there's any grant seeking, it's all part-time from someone. It's not like you have a dedicated seeker of grant funding, correct?
We do not have That's right. We do not have.
I like for the future, I think I would see the one weakness would be like not a part-time grant person who would be able to identify opportunities in the community, and almost rather than having even staff, junior staff, I could see partnerships like Blue Water Baltimore did, where they invested in a community partnership and paid people in the neighborhood where they were socioeconomically disadvantaged to partner with an organization and kind of carry out outreach. And so therefore you were kind of supporting a community and elevating outreach, but not through your own pocket. It was a very fascinating and great way to kind of increase awareness of workforce opportunities, increase disadvantaged communities. So I think that not having someone that can be a dedicated seeker of some of this funding and these opportunities to integrate all the good things we do and leverage some of these community partnerships in a more in a stronger way because of staff capacity, that could potentially be a weakness.
The only comment I would offer on that is that as we seek other opportunities for additional funds or staff, are we still consistent with the objectives in the charter of a conservation district?
Right. Yep. I hear what you're saying, John. And I guess that's why I was thinking to myself when Chris was mentioning some of these opportunities for the staff, you know, I suddenly heard a threat as to overloading and having too many things for a small organization, right? Because it can get, if you have your hand in too many fires, then you're suddenly you're overwhelming yourself with all of the things you could be doing when you really should be having a very strategic and thoughtful mission. But I guess the part I was mentioning about the volunteers was just kind of more of a promotional and communications and marketing leverage of what we do. But that doesn't mean that it would potentially flood us either. So I hear what you're saying.
I agree with you, Monica, and I think we may be at that point with too many things for a small organization to do. We expand small organizations, because the other threat that goes under there is staff burnout.
So are you saying that is one of our weaknesses, that we do too much?
I don't think it's a weakness. I think in our current staff grouping, we aren't positioned to be able to take on too much more quickly. And that includes the Alexandria type soil stuff, which I think are fascinating things for folks like Dan, who's an expert, to really do some soils work and apply that to other places. But I don't know that we should be doing it until our basic things are covered. But I want Dan to be able to stay interested, so we keep him interested, and therefore reduce his burnout factor and make him more likely to stay with the group. And I think we have to look at all of our folks as critical resources, and how do we keep them here? And I spent a lot of time in my past on retention management and how not to lose people, particularly when bodies were zipping back and forth between firms of the mid-level folks.
Okay, that is a good list. And I know we're anxious to get over to some opportunities, and we've only got about 8 minutes left. So we can jump in here a little bit more. So we've already said opportunity is an outreach to renters, adding junior people to support senior staff. So what are some of the other emerging opportunities that you might be aware of, or trends that we could potentially take advantage, or ways that we could utilize some of our strengths?
Let me go with one. This is Jerry. One of the things I think we're wrestling with organization-wide is people's experience and education in terms of what I would call project management. And that project management starts in the consulting community with a proposal. You have to sound like you know what you're doing. You have to write up tasks and schedules and costs and whatever before you do any of the work. I don't think any of our people have had that experience, but that experience would help us take on new and promising endeavors, possibly things that are more interesting than what they're already doing, if they understood how project management works. So training in project management, finding some experiences that we already have on hand to start managing those projects. I would like to see us work in that direction.
Laura, I have one.
Sure.
Our district is really fairly expert in stormwater management, and yet that term, stormwater management, is now just starting to be understood a little bit by districts throughout the United States. That's one of our strengths. And it's one of the strengths, Laura, you and I have talked about the WEF opportunity that my ECI group has. We're taking over one of their programs. That's what people are talking about, is stormwater management, and that's one of our strengths.
John, what would you see as an opportunity that could emerge from that? How could we, what do you see us doing?
Well, the opportunity I see is probably for more and more people to recognize our expertise in that area. But maybe more importantly, we'll be asked to do more ourselves here in Fairfax County and the Northern Virginia. And I'm not just talking about MS4s, but stormwater management, industrial water management in total.
Yeah, that's our charter. That's the state enabling laws. We're supposed to be helping people with water supply as well as stormwater and all the other, water related topics.
Yeah, I'm really quite specific though, just in stormwater management, which has taken on a life of its own.
Well, it has, Assad kind of got the district into stormwater management, BMPs, and look at the budget they've got now. Of course, that goes back at least 20 years with the county getting interested in the watershed planning. But it certainly has become big, and we contributed to it. But now it's the county with a staff of dozens, not us, unfortunately. We couldn't capture that. I think there's still other things we can be doing.
What are some of those other things, Jerry? You were talking about water supply.
I think, well, water supply is pretty well taken care of here too, because we've got the Aquifer Watershed Monitoring Lab, we've got Fairfax Water, we have great water expertise and industrial strength capabilities, in fact. But we have talked about dealing with the septic tank issue, both as a WIP issue and also as something the state health department is kind of backing away from, dealing with septic tank failures. Now septic tanks are not separate from wells. I mean, that's what we have in many areas of the county, and kind of filling a gap that the health department has left in individual homeowner education is something that we might be able to step into. So that's both their water supply and their wastewater. I'm not sure how far that's going to go. The health department is trying to get out of those individual retail services for people that are on sewer and public water. And I think we want to step into that very cautiously, because that's a whole different set of capabilities than what we traditionally have provided. But maybe it's something we want to think about.
And if CMOD goes through, there are several septic tank issues that I've been asked about having home businesses like beauty salons and barbers and car mechanics that are on septic.
Yeah.
And environmental health has said they're not going to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And people are worried about not only groundwater pollution, I'm more worried about the health of the septic tank. And when you start putting a few discharges of some oxidizer down there, do you wipe out the anaerobic bacteria that are actually making the septic tank work?
Right.
What are some of the more modern trends that we're not taking advantage of, or that we could take advantage of, I guess, these modern trends that require us to keep and maintain and filter the water on homeowner properties or on other new development.
You mean alternative septic?
No, not alternative septic, just exactly what we do with our cap and VCAP is that,
Oh,
whether through
stormwater.
conservation landscaping or anything like that.
Right. I think there's
These
a
are
lot of growth there.
DIYers that, that is a big kind of thing right now with COVID. Everybody's trying to do things themselves and try to see how they can, the homeowners really come to us, and a lot of the homeowners that come to us are the ones that trust us and have come to us with the green breakfast, and they already have a relationship. They know what we can offer, but
Adrian, I'm not sure I'm capturing this quite right, but I have support to DIYers, but you had a little bit more specificity on there in terms of supporting DIYers with implementing projects that promote
implementing projects that promote maintain or just I'm sorry, my dog is not letting me sit here without holding her. I have no idea why. But is being able to maintain that stormwater on the homeowner's property. So it's a or exactly what we're doing with VCAP, but there may be other opportunities, and that's what we're doing for developments, for new development, and for existing improvements. I mean, this might be commercial, but also for homeowners, and like we have helped different HOAs and faith communities.
Oh, I agree, and I think that, particularly speaking about something we're all familiar with, is cap and VCAP. Yeah, you all hear me cheer every time we get a DIY project come into VCAP, like this restroom project we just approved the final funding on. Yeah, I think homeowners turn to landscape designers because they don't know themselves what to do. I think that there are lessons learned that our people have seen. We have not compiled and make them available to homeowners who want to do it themselves. The other thing is we don't, aside from the list of people who've signed up to be VCAP contractors, we don't really have information we give to people about where they can go for services they can't do themselves. So they can make a decision how much they want to do themselves and how much to turn over to a contractor. I'm not sure what form that information would take, whether it's a pamphlet or a website or whatnot. But I think if the property owners or residents understood that we're on their side and we want to keep their costs low too, then those things that are kind of universal truths about BMPs, if we compiled them and said do this and don't do that, and for those things you can't do, this is how you look for the contractor. It might be helpful.
I sometimes I struggle with opportunities because my brain works a little differently in that I like to think about what the missive audience is, like what is our target audience, and then I can think about opportunities. Like I kind of come at this in a slightly different way. And so I think, we have what we have to deliver, and then we have the things that we do, but I guess I would love to know who that target audience that's a little more mushy is, so that we can be a little more strategic in true opportunities that ultimately lead to the audience we want to reach, if that makes sense. And I think I know that we have to hit certain targets because as a district, we have certain audiences we have to key into. But then we have this mushier fun side that's bonus, and it's really good, and it creates trust and relationship and solidifies our strength as what we bring to the table and the incredible staff. But ultimately, who is that? And then to me, the opportunity comes to kind of, what are our thoughts? Like, how do we best? But, I'm trying to be helpful in this area, but it's a little harder for me because I like to know, I personally need to know who are we trying to target in the future? Like, what are our soft targets? We have our hard targets, but what ultimately is the soft target achievement we want to see? Like, who is that we're speaking to? So the opportunities that we think about merge into that outcome.
Could I offer a comment on that?
Yeah.
This is John, and then I am going to have to go. I've got to go help somebody. Natural conservation districts throughout history have dealt with our natural resources, soil, water, air, plants, and animals primarily. And the people that control or own or manage those resources are our targets.
So everybody.
Yeah.
Almost.
It's really interesting, Monica, because we've been doing a lot of thinking about this with our outreach and education programs. And there's been a wide variety of new agencies, sections, and things like that have popped up over the last 4 years that have really created some competition within the niche that we've had before. But the unique niche that we have is that we focus on the landowners of today, the ones that are making decisions today, and we give them the information and the resources and give them the opportunity to access them in the best way that we can so that they can make informed decisions.
And not just landowners.
Whoever manages property, right? So
Land managers.
the land managers. But that is really ultimately what we've really focused on. We still have K through 12 education programs and engagement programs and stewardship opportunities, but our primary target audience for a lot of our programs are land managers of today. There's a number of other groups that are doing K through 12 programs on watershed education and things like that, and we complement one another. But we have really put a unique emphasis on helping land managers of today make good decisions so that when the next generation purchases them, inherits them, they will have the resources as well to, continue to make good decisions.
That's actually really helpful. So then to me, when I think about that, I'm thinking now of land managers, owners, and property managers. If that's like that's really our bullseye, right? Then in opportunities, I would say thinking, developing partnerships with more individuals that interact with those to help leverage what we provide with that information. So maybe figuring out our niche with realtors to make sure that, is there a way with realtors that we can create information that they can help support when they're working with clients? Is there more we can do? I don't know. I'll have to think about it a little more, but that's like the first one off the top of it's like, who do we not connect with, but is a specific target to this audience?
You're on the right track, Monica, and bankers would be another one.
Yeah.
Monica, are you channeling Amy Gould on that and her proposals with particularly LDS to educate realtors better?
Yeah, I've spoken with her in the past. Yeah. And I know she's definitely interested in doing that. I think she likes to balance a lot of things. I think we might have to go and think broader than one individual and think about the actual companies, right? Like we need to think about, I can't name one right now.
Well, she had started setting up a program with the realtors and LDS to do some training, particularly on RPAs.
Was that with the organization they had earlier?
One that starts with an F.
I don't remember.
So we've also reached out to Amy, and we were looking to go through the Northern Virginia Association of Realtors, which is a broader. It's not the single group. The only complication, was that we had, in order for the realtors to be able to get credit for the program, it had to be, there had to be an affiliated agency that had been approved by NVAR in order to be able to get the credit and really attract a lot of the realtors.
Are
So
we?
it's been paused, but it's not, and it's not out of the realm of possibilities in order to pick it back up again. And that would have been on floodplains as well. So we've got a sketch ready to go. So anyway, you guys are on the right track.
The affiliation that's needed there.
I think it needed a university-based affiliation. Adria, hey, how are you doing?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
I was like, huh?
And so
we'll talk about it offline here, but
because Angie's on the board there, so let's try to. I think that was something we looked at years ago, and I didn't have as much pressure or thumb on the board, but now I might be able to see what kind of thing, and that is huge. They look for those continuing ed credits just like any other profession would. Exactly. So I think that's reasonable.
Oh, sorry.
I would also say that, you know, on the realtors, bankers, but also your, you know, some of your other organizations, you know, your housing managers. So not
associations.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. I'm thinking property management associations, maybe. So I mean, they're
and along those lines, Adria, you're right. And I thought that actually Jem Bingle from out in Loudoun was onto the right thing when they did their like HOA. They had such a huge audience, and I think targeting this, because you know they're like needles in a haystack of our HOAs and civic associations. Not everybody's, you can't even get to, but some of them, like just that group trying to figure out how to, opportunities are really trying to be a better conduit of information, constant resource to them so that they're more tuned in. And I don't know if you aren't. I'm not saying you aren't. I'm just thinking off the top of my head of how do we engage these groups that really, they have monthly meetings. You know, I remember bringing Jim McGlone to one of ours for tree stuff, and they sopped him up like a biscuit. Like they were just like, what? So I mean, I think that these opportunities exist. Sorry, Jerry. So I think these things exist, but again, and it's an opportunity because it is a capacity issue. So what does that look like? And then we, you know.
You're absolutely right. I was invited to do an HOA civic association meeting and I couldn't attend it. And Maria helped me because and this was 2 years ago, on home turf. And, you know, I mean, the capacity is definitely there.
Right. And so then maybe we look and resume looking at what services we're providing. And if some of them are more peripheral and they're not specific to this soft target, I mean, it's still a hard target, but
this is right in line with a lot of what we've discussed, because on the staffing side, because one of the things is we've got thousands of HOAs and civic associations in Fairfax County. We've got hundreds of schools in Fairfax County to really do it right. And, you know, it takes a lot of resources, but if we can host something, then we can bring them to us and then we can relay information. So it's a way that we've really been trying to get our team. Many of them are really starting to work toward it.
And developed material that we have that we could use, videos or other materials that you've already developed during this pandemic. I know Ashley's been working on a lot of that with videos and different trainings that can be done on a taught or asynchronous type situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing I wanted to add as an idea, just tossing it out there, because it is quite popular now, would be, we have a number of associate directors and other things, and this, you know, developing a small cadre of Speakers Bureau volunteers that would promote the district. So do exactly what Monica had described, where, you go to an HOA meeting, or, someone who needs a speaker for an HOA meeting or something, we have a small group of beyond staff. So say, other reaches, and other talents. I don't know. You can scratch it later.
Yeah,
That's good.
one thing, when I was managing and trying to find incentives for particularly the innovative staff, I had done a lot of work for Lockheed, who had the Skunk Works, which was pretty, and I made a little Skunk Works project. It ended up being called 404 projects, just the way we tracked it with numbers. But it gave individuals the ability to kind of apply for a little internal grant that let them pursue some of their interests and geared towards all-encompassing projects. And I'm thinking of Dan and Willie and maybe Maria, on little bits of funding that gives them an opportunity to be innovative, and they put some of their own effort into, things they're interested in, help motivate and promote staff retention and morale. Because
like
sometimes you
research projects,
kind of, but ones that fit into the organization. They can't be anything they felt like.
right?
Had to have a goal that fit within our goals, and I can think of tons of them on the soils and phosphorus and the effectiveness of the VCAP program and the stuff that Jerry's been going on. In trying to how to relate all that together. And that also fits into one of the ideas of how do we integrating all this into GIS so as a better countywide database. And another one, since we're getting late, I'm just going to list them off. It would be nice to engage Heather in setting up a format for a small project consulting type stuff to look at the Alexandria one, so we integrate our real costs, and that if we do something, we're not just in doing salaries, we're doing benefits, time, infrastructure, ability to use our equipment. And also to understand how much time got really spent on that Alexandria soils project versus what the quote bid was for it. So we have a better learning experience on, if we do some of these. I'm saying we ought to take care of our own business first before we go out on this too much. But to understand and have a better process that I think Heather could take a lead on of how we cost some of these and use her financial expertise in someone and challenge her too. But that was just running through a list that I had made to get them on the board before we end, because now we're approaching 3 hours.
So let me move over here to threats. I mean, that was a really good discussion, a lot of different ideas, and it's interesting to see the focus on it. You all have a very interesting focus on partnership development and then very specific to district operations. So very, very interesting perspective. So let's go over here to threats. And what do we see are obstacles that we face? So we've added a few here already. What are some of the trends and threats that could harm us, and who might get in our way? And then what do our threats kind of, expose us to?
Uncertainty of our funding sources, year to year, VCAP and stuff.
New organizations or development of new agencies within the county that may be duplicative of our work, or have some satellite piece of our work and feel like it might be a little bit of a threat there. Like, for example, like the energy and environmental coordination group, and other soil, maybe other nonprofits too that are doing similar things.
Yeah, and I don't know, Laura, you would know better than I on this one. But I've noticed in my water world the lack of coordination with certain organizations that exist, using the same language, not having your customers and residents know who to turn to. And it's a lack of not so much knowledge of these different organizations, but the lack of the coordination of them, of the organizations themselves in establishing better kind of a resource network for the community so that the community really understands, how y'all work, how everyone works together. I just think to myself, and I don't know, right? Like, I don't know how well stormwater talks to you guys when they're out in the field. And I don't know exactly. But sometimes I just think to myself, well, I just wonder if the same language is being used. I wonder if there's an understanding all the time of who's where. And one of the big things that I keep hearing about threats is stream restoration. People are getting very uncomfortable with its use as a solve, as a something to solve stream quality.
I think the Charles Smith and the stormwater people are looking at alternative ways to achieve the stream restoration goals. There's been some criticism of the way that we've been implementing stream restoration projects, too much tree removal, too much heavy grading, and the stormwater people are looking at alternatives. So that's already underway, I think.
Yeah, but and I agree with you, Jerry, but if they go in another direction, what you might end up getting is some of these people being a little, there's going to be a level of trust loss that we've gone through all these stream restoration projects and they cost all this money and they took down all these trees, and now we're going to be veering away from that if that happens. So it's just something to be kind of cognizant of in the public sphere.
Let me give one more threat that I see in terms of a trend. I think we might have talked about this earlier, maybe Laura and I were talking about it earlier, and that is that increasingly our elected representatives, our board of supervisors, see energy as what drives environmental programs, natural resource programs. Energy conservation, that's a big current political thing nationwide, and lots of heat storm and heat recently because of the party differences. But the fact that this energy and environment organization seems to me to be entirely focused on energy. JET came up with nothing. The Joint Environmental Task Force came up with nothing on vegetation changes to achieve global climate change outcomes. The fact that they define their mission as climate change, I think, is part of the same trend that is a threat to us, because we're not talking about carbon sequestration at all with the BMPs we're proposing or other things that we're coming up with. So I think we need to keep up with that, but at the same time, if everyone thinks in terms of carbon, when we want them to be thinking about the Chesapeake Bay and the Occoquan watershed, the past threats that we have dealt with and are no longer fads, everything we're doing might become overcome by new, fancier trends.
So in a way, we're sort of, if we don't incorporate that kind of information, we could feel a bit obsolete. Is that what you're sort of saying, Jerry?
We may not be able to incorporate enough information to buck the trend. If and when the environmental funds, particularly from the county, but also from the state, that go in the way of carbon sequestration or stuff, we at least ought to be able to claim the benefits in terms of carbon sequestration and the things we are recommending. And I don't think we're all prepared to do that. But I think just in the long term, on a gross level, bay funding and watershed protection, whatnot, might be sucking wind for getting funds out of our local and state governments. That's just something that I think we need to think about.
Well, I think, some of the things that we do as an organization as Soil and Water, we're known to help farmers. And while farmers do need and use a lot of energy, there still are going to be requirements for good water quality and land conservation and soil conservation,
Yeah. hopefully they don't go away, but I think in terms of competing for funds, I think it's going to be an increasingly serious threat.
So one thing I'll share with you is because I've been involved in some of the advocacy for agriculture, agribusiness council, and extension recently. I spent some time listening. You go to, if you can go to Facebook or you're on Facebook, Farm Bureau did interviewing friends of the farm, and they interviewed a lot of the different delegates across the state. And those delegates that are in particular are on the House and Senate Ag, Natural Resource Chest Bay committees. So you'll find that almost every person who they interview, whether if it's an urban person like Marsden or Chap Peterson, who was, is from our area, versus people from the Northern Neck or even in Augusta County, their main things for ag are the natural resources, making sure we have good water quality, making sure we have enough land and land resources and the right soil and healthy soil in order to grow our food. So if you have a minute, they're like maybe 5-ish to 10 minutes long. And it's really interesting. They interview Ken Plum, they interview Marsden. Marsden talks about having chickens and raising chickens as a kid and being in 4-H. So while they're very urban with their with where they live and what their experiences are, they definitely see that, without those resources in the state, our number one economic industry, which it is ag, wouldn't be what it is. Number one and number three are ag and forestry.
Right, and there's a lot of work being done now on soil health, in as much as it contributes to sequestering carbon.
That's right.
And so they go hand in hand. There's no conflict of interest between people who are promoting energy related projects and what we do. But
right.
The funding, if we're seen as just a soil and water district and not an energy district, then where the fund's going to go next midterm in the future? I'm not suggesting we change it from soil, water, and energy conservation.
Oh, I know.
I think we need to be thinking about that and what they might do to the future. This is long-term funding.
This is great discussion.
I really want, I think I'm going to end this. I'm going to tag us here because I think we could probably keep going for another hour, and I know we're all getting hungry. But I think it's really important to to go back and take a look at our strategic plan, take a look at our programs as they currently exist, how we've begun to integrate some of these ideas, how we've begun and how we've kind of formulated a commitment and a name for ourselves from even with the energy side and CAP. I mean, you all have reviewed projects where we are doing energy enhancements and they make a significant difference. And we do have that strong partnership with OEEC to support us on that technical review. If we want to move into that realm and that sphere, what they see us now is we have a vehicle for project implementation. That's the difference. That we have a vehicle that they don't have in order for us to be able to move forward. And the way that we push it is, look at this unique skill that we have. Why do you want to duplicate this? We've got the process already set up. Just move that over here.
We listed that as one of the strengths for sure, and that is that we can do things that county governments can't.
Laura,
or we've established programs that it makes absolutely no sense for the county to duplicate it.
Right.
Laura, take Monica's comment of lack of coordination among organizations and copy it under opportunities too, and that fits in what you just said. We can provide some of that coordination between others that don't have the technical expertise or the organization, because we can be organized and we have some technical expertise.
I would agree with you there, Chris. I've been on committees where Laura often is the the nucleus, okay, where it is all of our outreach committees, and this is an MS4 committee, and it was all on litter, but it's everybody who works with litter around the county. And Monica, you might even remember that from a few years ago, and it was all about our litter survey.
Yep.
But if you look at even that, is that we have the advantage that is distinct among the county of being that trusted person and that trusted voice, and knowing which other trusted people, trusted voices to go to kind of surround ourselves with who's going to get that information, whether if it's neighborhood and community services, or if it's, you know, another organization in housing in the county, or just another nonprofit. But that is a skill that Laura brings heavily to our district.
I think also when we look at a lot of things, Jerry, I think it's really interesting, the topic that you were talking about, how energy, if we're not kind of fitting in with that mold, you know, we could lose potential for funding. And I did not paraphrase that very exactly, but in a sense. But it's also a similar kind of thing. Because of our district, we can bring other sources of funding to Fairfax County. And the NACD grant on urban agriculture is a great example of that. We provide some services. We have existing services that we provide through our, you know, Willie and the Soil and Water Quality Conservation Plan. He's certified in all of these great certifications. And we have that expertise here that can draw that potential funding. And then we have this network of urban ag, our urban ag work group through the Fairfax Food Council, that we can say, hey, here's a pot of money. You have projects that you want to get accomplished. We can bring our technical assistance into it to lift everybody and provide a better service. And that's what we really are looking for, is certainly looking out for ourselves, but also recognizing when there is that need for those additional folks. This is absolutely something that I think our organization does really, really well.
Absolutely.
And bringing that kind of, you know, those kinds of ideas to the table, and recognizing that silos is a great agricultural term and they're very necessary at times, but we're really, you know, trying to break through the various silos that are happening, you know, across the county, and integrate ourselves in spaces where perhaps they never thought about us, and they should, and vice versa. Neighborhood and community services come into our sphere because, you know what, people enjoy gardening too, and they enjoy, you know, all of these spaces, and you've got locations that would benefit from, you know, from the services that we can provide, and vice versa. So
I also see a really big opportunity as we see an aging population, with senior services and those groups. We're going to have, you know, a generation that's retiring, and it's just growing. We're doubling our population by 2040. So opportunities to provide a way to engage and utilize people who might be looking for new hobbies or new outlets or new outreach opportunities. It's not necessarily now just a high school intern. We could be looking at a whole nother group of community, you know, vested community servants who want to do something for their neighborhood and their space. And I think that's another opportunity.
Citizen science. There's a whole organization that's developed in the last couple of years that we're involved with, the master naturalist, citizen scientists, and that's exactly what you're talking about.
I agree with everybody.
You have to repair them. You have to give them the tools. You have to define.
Well, but that's going back to the point about the nexus that Laura is and this organization is how, you know, there's going to be opportunities. Other groups are making their own SWOT, right? And they're seeing opportunities. So maybe there's overlap. Maybe there's new opportunities to kind of continue that nexus in a different way, in a thinking outside the box way. So overlaying someone else's SWOT, that's similar outreach and community engagement in environmental sphere, and figuring out how do we complement each other.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of talents that are in this area that, it's just amazing. I'm I'm constantly blown away by some of the talents that people have, because of we are very affluent area. Education level is just really high, with even with the population that is retired, as a great volunteer resource. So
I think that's great. Well, I hope you guys feel proud and inspired and reflective, and all the feelings as you kind of go through this, and this is really critical as we sort of look at it, and as Chris was talking about with a gap analysis, we're really looking at where we can maximize our strengths to meet some of these opportunities or address some of the threats. If we're really good at networking, maybe we need to have a seat at the table, for some of these different things. You're going to see as we head forward next week on the agenda, there's an opportunity to appoint somebody to serve on the climate action and resiliency planning process with OEEC. We have a representative who has been participating on the climate energy community process. Anyway, the CCAP, and then we've got the CARP. So fun acronyms, of course, but when we think about it, I think the thing we need to really consider is establishing those long-term relationships with these various groups that are doing this kind of work, and making sure that we get invited to have a seat at the table, or if we're not invited, that we go in and ask for one. So those are just, kind of my approach to it.
Laura,
how I do things.
Can you send out the information on that? I was actually involved after one of the hurricanes down in Galveston on some resiliency stuff.
Sure. Yes, we'll get that information. Will certainly come out. If you want to talk to John, or you guys can talk about who you want to appoint, and we don't. We can certainly get that information back
I
over
might
to
be interested if it looks like it could be a viable organization to do good work, and not just sit around and talk in circles.
Well, sometimes you have to sit around and talk in circles a little bit just to make sure that you've got that seat at the table, and certainly make those contributions. But yeah, I think that sounds good. Yeah, I did. So anyway, I will send this out to you all. I appreciate your willingness to stick around for another hour plus and work on this. I think it's a lot of really good information that's been developed. And again, I hope you see that there's some work to do, certainly, but some great opportunities ahead of us as well. So it'll be fun to compile this with the comments from the rest of the team and associates. So.
Thank you, Laura. This is the most fun I've had at a board meeting for a long time.
Well, next time we all have to wear party hats, and we're going to have to make sure that everyone, we need like some fun, like, hey, wear a, as I have my video off.
You've already got your party hat on?
No, I just have a bun. Look at this. It's not even cute. I just have a bun. Oh, nice, Adria. Jerry, I totally blanked today on the tree commission.
Say what?
I totally blanked on the tree commission today.
Oh, you missed it?
Yeah.
Are we not doing hats anymore? Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're amazing. Put the hat on.
No. Oh, all right. Well,
Your hair's long. You're going to have to cut it, Laura, and donate it. It's beautiful.
Oh, well, thank you. It is very, very long.
I love it.
Thank you. There you go.
Oh,
See,
wow.
Adria, yeah, spotted life. I get it into every board meeting.
Gary, you can put your horns on.
What?
You can put your deer head on behind you.
You're muted, Adria.
Yeah, just bring it down.
Yeah, put your head under it, and then we can.
this is why we have to keep neonicotinoids.
Oh, yeah, there it is.
My bud.
See?
Oh, yeah, look at that.
I got two
Look at
more
that.
in here, too.
Fuck. You must
Wow.
have had some good meat off of that guy for a while.
Yeah, still eating it.
You're still eating it?
No, that's crazy. Well, again, I really appreciate everyone's time. It's really that was all I had to bring before the group today. That's cute, Adria. So it sounds like we've got a good process ahead for heading into next Tuesday's meeting. But is there anything else that you all want to bring up today?
So do you want any more input on the SWOT? Have we done what you wanted?
No, I'm going to send this out to everybody, and you can continue to add on to it to your heart's content. And I think it was really good. I know that there's a lot of things that I'm looking at this and I'm going, oh, we could add that. Oh, we could add that. But I've got my own process that we're working through, and I'm trying to stay neutral so that again, I don't bias you guys too much, because your input's really important.
Make a comment from one of Laura's and my past meetings on this. What I started doing a long time ago was coming up with a list of particular things I'd like the district to do, and it's 2 pages long. It's right at the top, and almost all of them can be fit into existing goals and objectives in the strategic plan. The question I posed to myself and after talking with Laura was, how many of these things do we want to elevate to the point where we actually mention them in the strategic plan? That's going to be tough for me because these are all dear to my heart, all 55 of them or so. But we can't put all of the things that I'd like to see us do in one document like that. But I think the specific things we've talked about tonight may not fit into the strategic plan. I think the format, the overall goals and objectives are good. And I think all we really need to do is amend them by adding some, maybe taking some off. But the process getting to that is going to have a lot more discussions like this, I hope.
I think so. And and the goals and our vision and our mission may stay the same, but we have removed objectives and we have added objectives. We have, during our annual plan of work, that's a place where we can incorporate specific activities that lead to meeting a specific objective. And we can parse it out and piece it out, thinking about, again, keeping in mind a couple of things. One, do we have the resources already? Number one, both staff and financial resources. And two, if we don't, is it feasible enough for us to be able to get them within the time frame that we are looking to do?
Yeah,
and what would those sources be?
If we can't see potential funding sources, should we even mention them in a strategic plan? They might be good ideas, but we want to show the public. There might be a benefit to telling the public, particularly our funding public, that we'd like to do this. So that's kind of a
I would say we definitely want to try to base our strategic plan on reality. And if we can't accomplish it within the time frame, we don't have to lose the idea. And it may be that there's a new funding source that comes up that we didn't even realize. That has happened several times over the last 4 years. And we have really been able to get ourselves to a position where we could take advantage of them. But if we can begin to integrate some new ideas, and we're already starting to do that on a number of different occasions, then we don't have to necessarily paint it completely out of the picture. It just requires us to come back and take a look on an annual basis and say, now's the time. Let's put this project that we had talked about on hold.
Right. The specific things we want to be careful about putting them in the strategic plan.
Yeah.
Right. We can always do, our team has space to do special projects. Things that come up year after year. You're going to hear about a couple of things on Tuesday that we have brought up in the past as well. And these are really good things. It's things like the Arlington Soil Survey project. It's things like the LID assessment projects that we've done in the past. Those are all special projects that came up mid-year, and we took a look at what we've got and made some determinations and then move forward. We needed an intern to be able to support us with being able to accomplish the LID assessment. We needed an intern early on as we were migrating over to support the home turf program to be able to develop some of the materials, all that kind of stuff. So we've got mechanisms for being able to make things happen. And it's really, again, it's the guiding document. It's the one that I turn to when somebody says, hey, Laura, I want you to assess all of the garbage cans and make sure they're the same size. I'm like, yeah, that doesn't necessarily fit within our scope of services, right? Or whatever. I mean, you can come up with all sorts of different silly ideas. But that's what helps us to say, one, it doesn't fit within our scope of services. And if it doesn't, but it's a good idea, hey, board, do we want to move in this direction? That's how it works.
Okay.
It's good. It's good. Great input. Really, really great input. You're going to find a lot of similarity between staff and board, some differences, but that's what makes this process so great. So it's good.
Very good.
So I see Scott Cameron, there was a note from John, was looking to maybe be an associate director again. Do any of you, John wants to bring that up at the next, maybe on Tuesday morning prior to the meeting? Are we going to have an executive operations meeting prior to
That's
the meeting?
a question I have for you. We have that time set aside if you all would like to meet prior to the board meeting. Would you all like that quick hour check-in? It's helpful for me to answer any questions you might have if there's something that's confusing or anything like that prior to just going into the board meeting. It's a nice little check-in.
I think it's fine.
We might want to talk about the wording of the motions of the things we covered tonight.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, I think that's good.
Figure
And
out
I'll provide some drafts. I'm sorry, Jerry, I cut you off.
who's going to make those motions so we know,
Yeah.
so we don't look too confused up there.
No, you're right.
Up there, I mean, here. Okay.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
So then we'll talk about Scott later, which will be,
Yeah, I guess Scott's recently out of a job. I wonder
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, he was an appointee. So yeah, he's a nice guy. All right. Well,
I think he would have some interesting information and provide a good perspective. So
I'd like to hear some war stories.
Yeah.
Scott, I really appreciated Scott, as you all might recall, was really instrumental in changing the formatting of the strategic plan and the integration of performance measures. And I really appreciated that. And thinking about targeted areas and things. So, he contributed a lot in a little bit of time in the way that we do things. So
He was good to work with. He was fun.
yeah. So I think if we, continue to think about things from that perspective, I would like, make sure that when we bring associates on, that we have something for them to do, so. Anything else?
No, I was just one more thing I think I was thinking about. I know we have an internship, and I think maybe down the road, if there's funding ever to think about it, maybe working with Urban Alliance with an internship. I think that would be like trying to identify opportunities where, especially now that we've gone into a pandemic mode and we can do things virtually. And we know that like transportation and stuff can be hard for some of our socioeconomically disadvantaged folks, but like just thinking outside the box of how we might be able to do an internship at home and be able to connect with the community through that kind of way. Just something.
That's a great idea. I've when we talk about stuff with the Urban Ag Work Group, we've talked about connecting some other social justice type organizations that might help us identify different resources or partners within the immediate community that we're trying to develop a garden or some kind of base. And that was something that Stacy Evers came up with as some ideas too, and some other folks brainstorming with Urban Ag Work Group. So
yeah,
it's a great idea.
It's a year long, and they would go through, I could see having someone trail Dan for a little bit with his soil expertise, someone understanding how to deal with like some of the administration of all of that. And because they'd have to go through all of the roles, but it might be of interest, and then outreach, and then just an opportunity. I think it's 9,500 of an investment from from the organization. But that said, I have a feeling EPA is going to be doing a lot with justice, and we may see some funding for environmental justice initiatives. So that's something to put in our pocket.
I think we're certainly going to. I hope we do.
Yeah, Chris, I think so. I can't imagine this administration might not put that in because of who I've seen them hiring. But you never know. You never know what's going to happen. I mean, but I think we should just keep our eyes peeled just in case. I mean, there is going to be a lot of funding cuts because of COVID, so who knows?
All right, they're going to be locking Laura in the building in a little bit, and sometimes I get concerned for the safety the later it gets in some of those creepy buildings. So
we have
I see
seen it go
her
dark.
face. Yeah. So we'll see you soon.
Be safe.
All right, so,
See you on Tuesday.
so we adjourned at 6:49 p.m. Thank you all so much.
Oh, do we need to move for adjournment? I move to adjourn.
That's
Second.
Okay, sorry.
no, I think that's fine. I'll just say that the meeting adjourned at 6:49. All right.
Hey,
Thank
where
you
do I
so
buy
much.
one of those vests, man? I need one of those vests.